Hey everyone, welcome to today's tutorial where we are going to build a full-stack SaaS application. This is an intermediate/advanced level project. So if you're looking for something new to add to your portfolio, to expand your skill set, or just looking for a starting point for your next big project idea, then this tutorial is for you. We will use Python and TypeScript as part of this tutorial, but if you only know one and not the other, then I still think that should be enough to follow along, because I think that you'll probably be able to pick things up along the way. So first, a quick overview on what we will be making. SaaS stands for Software as a Service, and it's a business model where customers can pay us for some kind of service that the software will provide. In today's example, the service is going to be an AI-assisted branding/marketing assistant. The customers will tell the service a brief description of their brand, and they will receive AI-generated branding snippets and keywords, which we will generate behind the scenes using OpenAI. The finished app will run in web browsers and on mobile. And if you want to try it out for yourself, I've hosted a demo of this app at copykit.co. And I've also attached the full GitHub repository for this tutorial in the comment description below. Now, just as a quick note, I did have to add an authentication layer to the app that I've published here, although I did not cover that in the tutorial. That's because authentication is required as per OpenAI's publishing policies, but I wasn't aware of that as a requirement until I had finished recording. So that's why it's not included as part of this project. So what technology are we going to be using today? This is a full stack app, so we will be building both the backend API component and the front-end static website that our customers will eventually interact with. For our backend server, we'll be using Python as a language, OpenAI for content generation, FastAPI as the API framework, and we will be hosting all of this on AWS Lambda. We'll also be using CDK and Docker to manage our infrastructure. For the front end, we'll be using TypeScript as a language, NextJS on top of React as the core framework, and TailwindCSS for styling. And finally, we're going to be hosting this as a static website on Vercel. I've chosen this architecture because it is modern and relatively best in class as of early 2022. All of these tools are also highly rated according to Stack Overflow tech surveys. But unlike Rust or Svelte, which actually scored even higher across the board, these tools are still relatively mainstream, which means that it'll be easier to find jobs or teams using this stack. Now let's talk a little bit about the operating cost of this app. So if we push this app to production and we're serving real traffic, then how much does it cost to actually run? First of all, our biggest expense is going to be the OpenAI API, which is charged to us per word, or they call it something like tokens. So our app, I calculated, uses something around 80 tokens per request, which means that for $5 a month, which is what I've set my hard cap to, we'll be able to serve about 1,000 requests. It's quite expensive for this amount of work, but we can downgrade the engine to the mid-range Curie engine. The prices I quoted earlier was for the top-of-the-line DaVinci engine. With the Curie engine, we get slightly worse results, but we only pay a tenth of the price. So for $5 a month, we'll be able to serve closer to 10,000 requests. Next, I've chosen serverless hosting both for the backend API and the front end of the app. This is because it's free to use, but also it can scale incredibly well if you want to flip the switch and go to hit production with your app serving millions of requests in a day. AWS Lambda, which we are using for the backend, has a generous free tier and will let us serve something like 1 million requests before we even have to pay a single dollar. After that, I think it's something like 20 cents per million requests. And Vercel, which we are using for our front end and our web component, is always free for hobby and non-commercial projects. If we do want to serve commercial traffic, then we'll have to upgrade to a flat fee of $20 per month. So as you can see, this architecture will allow us to get started with our app basically for free, but also will allow us to scale to millions of users quite efficiently, just at a flip of a switch. Finally, I know that this is a very long tutorial. It's 3 hours and involves learning quite a lot of different technologies and frameworks. However, building a project like this typically does involve using quite a lot of different things. So hopefully this tutorial gives you an idea of what that process is like end to end without oversimplifying things too much. However, because of its size, I don't recommend attempting to tackle this project all in one sitting. Instead, I recommend breaking this up into the backend component, the frontend component, and then maybe the styling component. This whole video is broken up into logical segments, which actually corresponds to the GitHub commits in the source code below. So that allows you to work at your own pace, but also pick up where you left off. So with that out of the way, we're ready to get started. This is a demo of the product here. So the idea is that I provide it with my brand prompt. For example, if I'm selling yoga mats, my brand might be yoga mats. And then I hit submit. And my output should be something like this. So my prompt was yoga mats, and my branding snippet is start your day with a smile and some good vibes with a yoga mat from our collection. And for keywords, I get things like yoga, workout, fitness, health, well-being, all that stuff. So you get the idea. This demo is actually available for you to try out on copykit.co. So if you give this URL a shot, you might be able to try out and play around with it and see what the app does. The purpose of this project is to show you how to build an application end-to-end that includes integration with OpenAI, although you don't have to do that if you don't want to make an AI-driven app. It includes the backend that handles the input we saw earlier and processes it, and then the front-end interface, which is what we're seeing here, and how it's made available on the internet and on mobile. So without further ado, that's our aim for today, and let's get started. Before we get started with any coding, let's first take a quick look at the architecture. So all the way on the left here, we have the OpenAI GPT-3, and we're going to access that with an API. So this is the actual AI model that does all of our language processing. Next, we're going to actually have our service that calls the API, the backend service, which is going to be implemented in Python. So it's going to be a Python script which we're going to use with FastAPI to turn it into a web API. So now we can call this from our, from our website. And this whole thing is going to be hosted on AWS inside a Lambda function, which we're going to make available through API Gateway. So by the end of this middle part here, we should have a web API URL that we can use to talk to this and get the response that we want. And finally, for the web interface we saw earlier, we're going to build a website using TypeScript as our programming language and NextJS, React as our framework. Finally, we're also going to use TailwindCSS as part of this project for the styling. And this entire front end is going to be hosted on Vercel. So once we have that and set everything up, the user can actually access it, and we have a fully functional web service. Now, each of these hosting options have been selected to be serverless, so we don't actually have any kind of ongoing fees. And these, both of these services have very generous free tiers, so I expect you'll be able to serve something like 1 million requests or more before you actually even have to pay $1 using these technologies. Obviously, serverless means that it can scale up or scale down very easily as well. So not only is it cost efficient, but if your startup decides that it needs to get very big or grow by 300% in one day, then this architecture allows you to do that very quickly. Okay, so now actually let's get started with the project. We're going to work sort of from the left side of this outwards to the right. So obviously we have to start here with the OpenAI GPT-3. We're going to need to get some API access keys so we can call this, and we can try to use it a little bit as well to see what type of input-output we will be getting. So OpenAI's GPT-3 is an AI language model that lets us do a crazy amount of stuff with the right prompts and inputs. We don't actually have access to the source code of the model itself. Instead, we make API requests to a hosted version of this model, and we get the output that we want. So this is going to be the thing that powers our keyword and branding snippet generation. To start with this, you'll first need access to GPT-3, which before it used to require a waitlist, but now I think you could just go to openai.com and get started by signing up, and you should have access right away. So if we go to the documentation over here, I suggest you take a bit of time to read through all of this, all of the usage guidelines, safety best practices, and pretty much everything here as well. But what we care about is this developer quick start section. And once you create this, you're going to have API keys, which, by the way, you should never reveal. But the ones I created here, I will delete after this video so I can show them for the purpose of this tutorial. But this is what we're eventually going to need for us to programmatically interact with OpenAI. And we'll have to install the Python binding here like this. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. And this is a quick example of how to use OpenAI in an application. So let's see if we can get that going really quickly. So I've got a new Python environment here, which doesn't have any packages yet. I'm going to do pip install OpenAI, just as it says in the instructions. Okay, so once the installation is done, I should be able to create a Python application that interacts with OpenAI. So let's go ahead and try that now. I'm going to take this example snippet that they have in the tutorial here, and I'm going to create it in this workspace. So right now my file is this copykit tutorial folder, which is an empty new Git project that I've created. And I'm going to make a directory called app, which I'm going to use for my Python application. So let's go into that directory. Okay, so now I'm here. I'm going to open my Visual Studio Code to that page. Just this one here. So I copied the snippet. And now I'm in my project folder. I've created this folder app where I'm going to keep all of my Python application that I'm building. I'm going to create a file called copykit.py and put in the snippet that I just copied from the example documentation. So here it is. Looks pretty good. So let's see if we can use it. Firstly, we need to load the API key from environment variable. So let's do that. So in Python, we can set the variable. We can just set it in the environment here, and Python should be able to find that if it's running from the same place. So I'm going to actually copy my secret key, which, by the way, never reveal or expose your secret key. But for this one, I'm actually just going to show you how you can export it as an environment variable, and then I'm going to delete the key. So I guess it's safe, but in practice, be very careful about doing anything that exposes your secret key for people to see. Okay, and I can set my environment variable like this. Right, this is my temporary secret key. So now that when I run the application, it should work. So hold on, let me make this a bit smaller. Go. So I could use their example code, and I'm just going to print the response so we can actually see what it comes up with. Save this. Then run my application. Okay, it works. Now, let's clear it and tailor the prompt to what we want for our application. So, first of all, our prompt is going to be something like this. Well, actually, let's make it a new variable. Generate upbeat branding snippet for, then we'll create another variable for that. We'll call it subject. We'll call it coffee. Just because we want to be able to change this input later. So now we have something like that. That will be our prompt instead. And for the max tokens, I want a little bit more space, so I'm going to set maybe 32. That's how long the response can be. So let's give that a shot now. Just run it again. Okay. It's given me something, but this doesn't make a lot of sense because I think we have to use a different engine. So right now we're using the DaVinci engine, which is here, and that continues the example that what we have. So I think we need to change it to the DaVinci instruct, which we tell it what we want, which is what we're doing. We're asking it to generate something rather than providing an example for it to continue. So that's why we have to change the engine to DaVinci instruct beta. And then we can try this again, see if it comes up with the right output this time. Okay, here we go. Coffee, the best part of any day, whether you need energizing pick-me-up or a soothing warm. Okay, good. Well, this is cut off because we limited the output to 32 characters, but that's fine. So I think with this, our API integration is ready to go, and we can start building our Python application. So we're going to go ahead and implement this part of the service now, which is going to be a Python application. I basically want to wrap this snippet that we created earlier that generates our output, but do a couple of things to it, like make it easier to add this input and make it easier to get the response out of the message that we receive. We're going to try to break this up and turn it into an interface that we can use more easily. To start with, let's first create an entry point for the app so that when I run it, it's not just running it like this, but we can run it with some kind of input, like, you know, like that instead. Obviously, if I do this, I don't think anything's going to happen. Like, it's just going to ignore it. Yeah, so it just ignores my argument for now. For example, if I change this word to cars, it's still going to generate the output for coffee because obviously that's hard-coded. So I need to make this work. All right, so let's get started on that first. Let's create our main function, which is going to be our entry point into the app. And again, let's do this. Okay, so we have this now, and we're going to do this, say, running copy kit. And I'm just going to comment out this entire part for the moment because we don't want that yet. So let's go ahead and run this again. Okay, running copy kit. Now, how do we get this input parameter working? So this is Python has a module for us called argparser, which we can use to do things like this. So let's go ahead and add that in. We have to actually import it first. We have to do like this. Create a new argument parser. The official docs are available on this, so if you want to know more about it, just search for argparser in Python. It is a default library, so you don't have to pip install anything. And I can add an argument like this one. Name or flag, so I want to call it input. This. I can do I. And the type is going to be a string, and it is going to be a required input. Okay. So again, if you want to look at more keywords and arguments available, then yeah, I suggest looking up the official documentation. So once we've created the arg parser, we just call it with parse args, and that will give us an object, which we can get this attribute for directly. So user input will be args.input. So that would be the name that I gave it here. Now let's actually make sure that works by printing it out. Okay. So run my application again. There we go. Running copykit, user input cars. Let's try it with something else. Yoga mat. Okay, so now it's knowing how to capture our user input. And what happens if I don't pass in anything? It throws an error. It says I definitely need this input because it's required. Okay, so far so good. So now I want to take this input and use it as part of this prompt. So let's actually wrap this into a function. I'm going to uncomment it, bring it back, and I'm going to say generate branding snippet. And this one is going to take user input. Actually, I'm just going to call it prompt here. Okay. But we already have prompt here as well. So I'm going to rename things a little bit because this is a prompt, but this is also a prompt. So I'm going to just give this an adjective, enriched prompt. This is the one we actually sent to OpenAI. Oops. Go. And yeah, I don't need this one anymore. And I can do this. So now when I use this, I can generate a branding snippet with my prompt. Well, this is actually my user input. And that becomes my prompt, which gets enriched with this instruction. I don't know if I want to do a colon, so it's clear to the AI. I want a response from that. And then it gets passed on to the OpenAI API here, and I get the response in this form. So first of all, let's just check if that works so far. Okay, so now we got this, which is good. So the next step, we want to extract just this line from the output. So the structure of the output is that there's a choices object, which is an array, and we only have one element because I think we only requested one choice. And in that element, we need to get the text key. So we should, if we path that properly, we should be able to get the string, and then we'll have to get rid of all this funky stuff at the beginning and at the end. So let's give that a go first. The branding text is the response choices with an S. Okay. Index 0, because that's the only one we're getting. Then text. I think it's text. Yep. Okay, so now we should have the branding text, and I can just print the branding text on its own instead of the whole response. Let's run that again. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I don't like how at the end here it kind of like we specified that it can only be 32 tokens long. So sometimes it cuts off what it wants to say. I don't want to increase the tokens because I want to stick to that limit, but I want this to look a little bit nicer. I want to make it clear that it's truncated. So I want to add like an ellipsis at the end of this sentence. So I could do that by actually first checking if the last character of this string is, you know, like a full stop. And if it's not, then I'm going to add the ellipsis. So the last character is going to be the branding text, and I can index a string like an array. -1 means take me the last element. And then I can check if last character isn't in. I'm going to create a set here, and here's the punctuation, but I'll add a couple of other ones as well, which are valid sentence stoppers. Then I want to append triple dots to it. So that should give me a nicer finish than these things. But one more thing I actually want to do is also strip the white space, because we saw there was some outputs that would have a new line. So I'm just going to do a strip there. It works on, well, we can't really see what it does because it doesn't know that that's a string, but if I do this instead, branding text equals branding text dot strip, you can see that it's returns a copy of the string with a leading and trailing white space removed. The reason I have to do, like, if I just do branding text strip, it's going to strip it, but this doesn't change the actual string. The string is immutable, so it's just going to return a string that doesn't get used. So if I want to change it and strip the actual characters, I have to sort of reassign the value here. And so I've stripped the white space, I've added ellipsis. Let's put some comments so we know what we're doing. Extract. Text. And strip white space. Truncated statements. Okay, so I've added a couple of labels, and now I can print this. But actually, I don't want to just print it, I want to return it. So I'm going to do that instead. And I'm not going to print this anymore. Instead, I'm going to capture the output here and print it here, because I want this function to be able to be used in other places later on. So printing it doesn't really do me much good. So I could, if I want to print it, I'll capture the results here and then print it here instead. But I do want to make this return my result. Okay, so let's give that a shot. Here we go. The yoga mat is the perfect place to find your zen. Blah, 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 blah. And yep, there we go. We've got our ellipsis because the sentence is truncated. Well, actually, I don't even know it's truncated. I mean, it's a perfectly fine sentence. It's a great way to start your day or wind down after a long day. Well, let's see a couple more examples and see if it does what we want. Okay, this one's good. No ellipsis because it does end with a full stop. Let's try again with something else. Maybe back to our coffee. I kind of like simple examples. Okay, this is a good example here. This is obviously truncated, so it says, we have all your favorite coffee drinks to help get ... So now it's clear that this is a truncated output. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. So now we've got this part of the application. Got my branding snippets here. I also want keywords because part of our application design, we generate branding snippets, but we also generate keywords. So let's turn that into another function. Generate keywords. We're going to print both of them. Okay. So now I need to create that function. I'm just going to copy this one here. I'm going to reuse most of it. Okay, so what I want to do, I want to enrich the prompt differently. I want to say generate related branding keywords for the prompt. Still use the same instruct engine. And I'm going to change the name of my output just so that it reflects what we're actually doing. So this is still going to be the same. I don't think I'm going to need this part anymore. And then I'm going to return keywords text. So let's see how that looks first of all. So now it's going to generate both branding snippet and keywords. Okay, so those are my keywords here. But keep in mind that this is actually an entire string, but I want it in an array so that when I display it on the front end, I can do things with each element. So I'm going to have Python split this up for me into a bunch of words. In this case, the delimiter is a comma, but sometimes I've seen it use other things as well, like a dash or a new line. So we are actually going to split the string using a regex. So we're going to have to import regex first, just so that we have different choices. Then we're going to do this, regex split. The first thing is the pattern. So the pattern is I want to split it on comma or new line or star or a dash. I think maybe that's fine. And it's going to be the keywords text. Okay, so now let's actually print that out, and this will not return a string anymore. It's going to return a list of strings, which we'll have to import this one as well. Okay, so now this is what our import looks like, and we are actually returning a list. So let's give that a shot. Whoops, I have an error here. Let's try that again. I think my regex might be wrong. I think that this is actually a special character. So I'm actually just going to ignore that one for now. And yeah, maybe just do this instead. See if that works. Okay, this looks better. So now I have my keywords as a list, but there's some white spaces and there is a blank element. So let's fix that really quick. Let's we're gonna use list comprehension to create a new array, and first of all we're gonna remove the white spaces from each element. So k for k in keywords array, we're gonna do k strip, which will remove the leading white spaces. We've done that. We assign it back to this, and then after that we are gonna remove any elements that are empty. So we're going to keep these elements if the length of that element is greater than 0. So this should strip the white spaces, delimit it into a list, and also filter out anything that's empty. Let me try it now. Okay, looking pretty good. And just to make my keywords more consistent, I'm going to also make everything lowercase as well, because like this one here, just want to make it more user-friendly. So do this. That. Okay, and then let's just do one last test to make sure it still works. Yep. Okay, looks like everything is working fine now. Okay, so now we've got our two core functions for this program, and they seem to be working as intended. Now, one last thing we do before I move on from this section is, first of all, I want to clean up the elements that we print or that we log a little bit, just so it's more useful. And I also want to validate this input. So I want this input, I only want to use this input if it's under a certain length, just so that my application, my user can't sort of antagonistically send a very long input, and that's going to cause trouble for my application or going to use up a lot of my credits. So let's start with that first. Let's validate length of the token, the prompt here. And I can make this return, I can make this throw an error, or in this case I'm just going to make it return something here. And I'm going to say that if length of prompt is greater than, we could pick a number, say 12. Actually, I don't even need if. I can just return length of prompt is less than or equal to 12. So this will be true or false, whether this condition is true or not. And then I'll do this. Say if I can validate the length of the prompt, then I'll generate all this stuff. Otherwise, I can raise an error. Well, I don't want to type 12 twice, so let's actually store this somewhere. Say max input length is 12. I do want to change this later, by the way. I just made it short so we can test it easily. Must be under max input length. Submitted input is, whoops. Okay. Alright, we'll use that there as well. Okay, so now I have a function that checks if my input is short enough, and if it's not, then we are going to throw. Otherwise, we'll run the app as normal. So let's try this again with a really long input. Okay, there we go. And just to make sure it still works with our short input, let's try something else this time. I really like my hot drinks, in case you can't tell. Okay, so now it doesn't work with very long input, it still works with short input. Yeah, I think that's pretty happy with that. Let's actually set this to something like 32 so that there's a bit more space for the user to type in stuff. And finally, I think for debugging purposes, it's probably a good idea to print out the enriched prompt as well, not just the results, just so we see what we're actually setting to OpenAI. So we'll print this out, and we'll also print this out here. And I don't think this is helping, so we can remove that now. Okay, and instead of printing that in here, I'll actually print it within these functions themselves. So let's print it here as well. Okay. Okay, so I think our app's looking pretty good now. Let's try that again. Okay, there we go. So this input's actually kind of useful. We can actually see what it's sending over to OpenAI, and we can see the results. And we've got the validation, so if user tries to enter something very long, we just reject it. So now we have a working application. I do want to make a checkpoint here, so I am going to commit all my changes so that you can refer to that just for this particular section of the project. And it's just this one file at the moment. Push it there. Okay, so now you can use that commit history, this one here, if you want to just work your way to the specific part of this project. Now that our Python application is ready, we are looking at adding a API layer to it so that this thing itself can become an API, because we can't call this directly in our terminal. We need it running on a server, and we need something else, namely our website later on, to be able to talk to it. So by the end of this step, we should have a REST API that we can use to call this Python application. So for the next part of the project, I want to turn my Python application into an API, which means that it'll be able to be accessed publicly over the internet. Because right now my application works quite well, but it is limited to being run from the terminal like this. So I basically want all of this functionality available over HTTP, because I'm going to need that if I want to build a fully functional web application. In order to do this, I think the easiest way is to use Python's, well, there's a framework on called FastAPI available on pip, and it's very popular right now for building APIs in Python 3.6 or above. So we're going to see how this looks, and it should be a very process for us to turn our Python into an API application this way. So if you go to the FastAPI website, just search for FastAPI on Google. You find this website here, click on the tutorial, and just follow the instructions to install and run a basic hello world. So first of all, we're going to need to install this, run this line, pip install FastAPI. Let's try that here, pip install FastAPI. I think this needs to be in double quotes. Okay, you run that. So once the installation is done, we should be able to follow the instructions and test it out. So I'm in the tutorial section, first steps here, and once everything is installed, I should be able to test this out. So here's a snippet of what the file should have. Copy that to main.py. Okay. I don't actually want to call it main.py though, because we have a app here called copykit. So instead I'm going to call it copykit_API.py. But I'm going to still use the same code. I'll just copy paste it in. And now to run it, I need to run this command with the live server. Obviously we changed the name from main to copykit, so we'll have to reflect that as well. So our function is going to instead be this. Okay, let's just copy that in our terminal and try it out. Okay, so now it says it's running. And so if I go to this URL, I should see a response from my app. So I see this message, hello world. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see that. And if I change the contents of my app, it should also be reflected in the API call. So if I call it again, yep, I can see that it has updated. And also, if we actually look at the tutorial, we can also get a bunch of docs with it. It tells us what API is available, and we can even test, run tests against it with different inputs. So let's go ahead and click that there. And this set of docs is generated for us. Well, let's set it back to a normal size. This is generated for us based on our source code. So this is very clever actually, because now we can see what we get from it. So if I just click try it out, I just execute it, I can actually see my response here as well. So I don't have to just do it through the URL. Okay, so we have this now. I want to turn this server into an API where these endpoints can be used with my application here. Now I'm not going to change my original application, I'm going to keep it the way it is, but instead I'm going to import it into this API and use it here instead. So I'm going to do this from copykit import. Okay, so these are my two functions, generate branding snippet and generate keywords. And let's do this one first with the branding snippet. So we're going to do that here. I'm going to call this generate branding snippet API. Actually, I should make this a bit shorter. I don't need the full name. So I'll do that here. And this function already returns a string. So we can do something like this. Snippet equals generate branding snippet. But it needs a prompt. So how do we get this prompt? We actually need to add some parameters to it. If we go to the queries parameter section of the doc, we'll see some examples on how to add that. We basically just add them as function arguments into this, and it would actually, the framework will understand to turn that into query parameters. So we can just try it really easily by testing this out here. type in prompt as a string, and hello copykit. I'm gonna actually make it return the prompt like this, so we can see that it works before I actually run the function. We go back to our API Explorer and let's refresh this again. You can see that the root path is gone, and now we have this generate snippet API. If I click here, we see that the prompt is a required string. So if I click try it out, I can type in my coffee prompt and execute it. And I can see hello copykit prompt coffee. So now we have a way for the user to give us an input. And by the way, this is what the URL looks like. So if I actually just put this into my URL browser, this is what I also get there. Cool. So let's actually run this with our application now. So I've imported this function and I can put in this prompt here. And now I can return my snippet like this. Okay, let's give that a go. So refresh the dashboard again, and we have this prompt. We try it out, and we'll type in, let's type in something else. Type in soccer. Okay, execute. Soccer chants and cheers, you know you love it. Okay, so this is our response from the AI. So this is working quite well. And just check that we can do it through the URL as well. Let's try it with cars. Are you looking for a car? Okay, so here we get a snippet that's car related, so that's pretty good. Okay, so now our API is able to generate the snippet. Let's make it also able to generate a keyword. All right. I think it's smart enough to know that this returns a list of strings, so we don't actually have to convert or cast that or anything. So if I save this and go back to my browser, I should see my new endpoint. So I've got my generate snippet, I've also got generate keywords. So let's try it out. And let's type in maybe bottled water. Okay. So my keywords for bottled water are these. Pretty good. I get water, drinking water, purified water, all types of waters. Okay, so this obviously works. So yeah, so now I have an API out of my Python application. Actually, before I do that, I probably want to put the validation here first. Because remember we had the validation, it was here, but if a user is using this app through the API and not through the CLI, they can skip this entire validation. So yeah, let's actually go ahead and do that. And also, my app is going to use both of these together. So instead of having two separate endpoints, I probably want to combine them into one endpoint that generates keywords and snippets as well. So now I've got 3 endpoints and I want to validate the input on all of them, but on this one I want to combine the output. Okay, so how do we do that? First, let's actually just write the logic for this. Generate snippet and keywords, and I'm just going to have it both like this. And now I might want my output to be consistent throughout all of these things, so maybe I'll do it like this instead. This way, if I'm writing some kind of handler for the output to my API, it at least has sort of like one response schema it needs to know about, so it doesn't have to understand different types of responses for each of them. So I think I can do it like that. Okay. So let me try this generate snippets and keywords one next. We'll refresh this here and try this for dog treats. Execute. Okay, so now I get snippets and keywords in my response. So what I wanted. But I also want to guard against very long inputs now. So let's add in our validation. So with FastAPI, I think we can make it fail by just throwing the right type of exception. And I want to validate the input before I actually try to run it through the AI. So I want a function like this, validate. Yeah, I guess we already have it valid. Well, actually, I want one that's specific to the API. So I'm going to create a new function here called validate input length, and it's going to take the prompt. And if it succeeds, then nothing will happen. It's just going to pass through. But if it fails, I'm going to make it throw an exception. And I think that's going to make my API fail as well. So I can actually import the length validation from here. Actually, no, I don't want to use this one at all. So I'm kind of duplicating code a bit, but I kind of want this number available at this level as well. So I'm going to write my own function here. I'll say if length of prompt is greater or equal than max input length, then I'm going to raise well, actually, no, I want to. So actually, if we go to the FastAPI, it will tell us what type of exception we can raise. Okay, so in the documentation, there's a section here called handling errors. And there's a whole bunch of stuff here. I'm just going to skip to the code snippet. If we import HTTP exception, we can raise it with a status code and some kind of detail message. So I'm just going to copy that and use it right here. For that, I'll import it. Okay, so this is imported from FastAPI. So I do it like this. Okay, so I'm going to say instead, this is going to be a 400 and I'll write input length is too long. Must be under this many characters. Okay. Okay. So now I have this in front of each of them, and they should fail if it's over this amount of characters. So we can try that now, actually. Go back to my API dashboard, and let's just type in something really long. Okay, run that, and there we go. It's got a 400 error. Input length is too long, must be under 32 characters. So yeah, now we have length validation. We've got a couple of different APIs, and yeah, I think our API server is ready to go. So we can move on to the next step. Okay, so now the FastAPI integration has been added. I'm gonna make another checkpoint here and just commit the changes so that you can check that one out if you want to just work up to that point. Now that we have a functional Python API application running locally, we need to put it in the cloud so that we can call it publicly from anywhere. So now we're going to focus on this part, which is hosting this application that we just built on AWS. We're going to build the cloud infrastructure that allows us to host this API online and let us access these endpoints not just from our local host, but from anywhere in the world with an internet connection. So we're going to take this entire application, host it somewhere, and make it publicly accessible so that we can continue building it out. This is quite a complex part of the project, so if you start to get lost, don't worry, just take it easy and maybe pause the video and take a bit of time to look at each of the different technologies we have to use, because I will be going through them sort of quite rapidly here. And just to give you an idea of the technologies we'll need here, or the requirements, first of all, you're going to need an AWS account, which you can just go to the AWS website to create one. We're going to be using all the free services, so you shouldn't be charged any money, but you might have to set up billing beforehand. Once we have an AWS account, you also need the AWS command line tool, which you can just search that in Google and find instructions on how to set it up for your machine. And if that works, you should be able to type in AWS this version. Well, I actually don't have this, so I'll pip install it now. Yeah, with AWS CLI, if you already have Python, it's mostly just a matter of installing it. So I'll let that run, and this can continue here. The next thing you need is AWS CDK. So that is a tool for creating infrastructure with code. And again, if you just type in AWS CDK, there's a couple of getting started guides here. So go through that first and make sure you installed. But a couple of things with the CDK. So this actually is natively a Node application. So you might have to do an npm install. So you might also need Node.js beforehand. They actually have a Python version as well, but I think that Node and TypeScript is the native language for CDK. So we're going to use that just so that we're using sort of idiomatic tools. So make sure you have that as well. So now in my terminal, I can check my versions of my applications. I've got my AWS CLI here, and it works. And I have my CDK, and this works as well. And the node I'm using right now is version 16.3, CDK 2.3. So if you're following along with these, make sure that the versions you have of these applications match. And if you can run these commands, it probably means you've mostly installed your stuff correctly. Now let's go back here. Okay, so TypeScript. Oh, so CDK is written, well, the Node version anyway is written with TypeScript, so you need to know how to use that as a programming language. If you know JavaScript already or you know Python, then learning TypeScript should be easy. You might be able to just pick it up from looking at it, but if you want a refresher, just search some TypeScript tutorials really quickly or some examples on the internet. But it should be pretty easy if you're already coming from a another programming language, so don't let this one put you off. And finally, we're also going to need a bit of a knowledge from Docker as well, which is, if you don't know what it is, well, it's not important to know what it is for this tutorial, but we are going to use it, so might go ahead into, I might recommend just go ahead and installing it and reading up a little bit about this as well. And we're going to use it for a very specific purpose here, which is to prepare our infrastructure with dependencies, so that when we actually put our application in there, it's got all of the files and packages it needs. And I'll show you later on how this is used in our project. So once you have all of these dependencies installed, I know it's quite a lot and taking time to get familiar with them, or maybe you already know them, then we can start building out the next part. The goal of this next section is to put our Python application, which we've wrapped in an API using FastAPI, we want to put this on the internet so that we can now use it. And we need a plan for that. So here's the plan that I'm going to use. Now, just as a quick disclaimer, we can do this a bunch of other ways. We can just host this on a DigitalOcean server or an EC2 instance, or there's many ways. If you just search on Google, how do I host a FastAPI online, or how do I turn it into an online API, there's probably going to be a lot of different ways and lots of different results. But for this project, I've chosen to do it this way. And the reason is because I feel that this is scalable in terms of not only from a user perspective, like if we need to serve more requests, we can scale this up very quickly. It's also cost efficient. If nobody's using this, or if you're getting very few requests, it's pretty much free. In fact, you could probably serve millions of requests for free with this setup. But also it's efficient from a developer's perspective, because once you set this up and once you've got the infrastructure going, it can be quite easy to maintain, because we're going to have a code package to actually maintain all of these things instead of having to configure it in the console. And our dependencies as well are maintained by a separate system with a base layer here, so we don't have to worry about copying that in by hand or doing some weird scripting thing. We can just focus on our application. So that's the choices behind selecting this particular infrastructure. So now let me explain each of the components here. What we're going for, or the app that we just built in the previous section, is this part here. So this is the copykit app, which are two Python files, exactly these things here, which is our core application. That's what I want to be worried about. And so we're going to put this inside AWS Lambda function, which is a serverless compute platform. So unlike regular servers like an EC2 instance or a DigitalOcean droplet, we only pay for Lambdas when we use them. So this is inactive when there are no requests being served. And only when a request comes in, which we'll find out later comes in from API Gateway, another service we'll be using, it will turn on, it will process this application, and then it will shut down. So it's pretty efficient. We only pay for what we use, and it can scale very fast as well. So if we suddenly get a lot of different requests, it can create a lot of different Lambda functions to serve all those requests at the same time. So we're going to use AWS Lambda function to compute this, but another detail in here is that, well, first of all, you see that these apps that we've created, they have a lot of dependencies like FastAPI, they've got, this one has got OpenAI, and, well, yeah, I guess it's just those two for now. But by default, these dependencies aren't included in our source code. So when we build our Lambda function, and we copy in those two files, we won't be able to pip install those dependencies. So in order to have that available in the Lambda function, we also need to upload that as well. So the best way, well, there's a couple of different ways to do it. We can package it locally and copy the source files in here and then bundle it all up into a zip and then send the whole thing up to Lambda. But I don't quite like that because it's quite hard to manage, and then it also makes it, if you have a bunch of local files here that you're only uploading to Lambda but not using in here, it makes it kind of weird. So instead, what we're going to do is create a base layer. So Lambda lets you have these things called base layers, which is kind of like a bunch of files that are there in the function for our application to use. And in the base layer, we're going to install the dependencies that we need. So we're going to install FastAPI, we're going to install OpenAI, all the heavy stuff. Basically, if I type in pip list here, all these dependencies, the files that are, make all of this work, we're going to bundle it into the base layer. And we're going to do that once and upload it to Lambda. And then from then on, we can just write this app without having to worry about the dependencies ever again, unless we change it or make a new set of dependencies. But in order to do that, we're going to need to use Docker, which is a containerization software, which kind of sets up like a mini virtual machine environment for us to do a bunch of stuff in. So we're going to set that up, run pip install into there, and then we're going to copy all of those files in that environment into a zip folder, which we will then use as our base layer. Okay, so that explains the Lambda function. But the Lambda function on its own doesn't have any way to be accessed by our user outside. So in between, we need an API gateway, which acts as, well, it's basically an AWS service that lets us type in a URL into the web browser or from anywhere else, from a client, and we can integrate that with Lambda so that when a user hits a particular endpoint, we tell API Gateway to invoke this Lambda function and then return the results. So effectively, when we put these two things together, we have a fully functional serverless API. So an API that we can use from anywhere, but we don't actually have any running service behind it. Only a Lambda function that turns on when it is called. Finally, to manage all of this infrastructure so that we don't have to click in the console, because that's quite an error-prone way to do things, we're actually going to create these components with code using another AWS tool called CDK, which I think stands for Cloud Development Kit. So it lets us program this, this whole thing here, this program, this infrastructure, this API gateway, as well as its relationship with each other as code, and then lets us deploy it to our AWS account so that we get all this stuff right from our repository. Okay, so sorry that was quite a bit long, but I think that this is quite an important part of the service, so I wanted to be thorough in explaining our plan behind that. Now that we have a plan for our project, let's actually go ahead and code this up. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new folder for my CDK project, because this has a lot of files when I create this, so it's probably better to be its own project and separate it from our app. So I'm going to go ahead and do this here. So this was our app where we have our server and our API. Let's go to the directory and create a new directory there, which I'm going to call copykit infrastructure. This. Okay. And I'm going to go into copykit infra, and I can create a new project in here using the CDK command line. So first of all, if you want to follow along with this version, make sure that you have major version 2.3 of CDK. If you do, you can just type in CDK init language TypeScript. You can actually also init a Python CDK project if you don't want to use TypeScript, but I like using TypeScript because I feel like it is the native language for CDK, so I want to stick to the sort of original tools as much as possible. And you give this a while now, and it's just going to create this project inside our folder here. Okay, so now the project has finished setting up. If we look at it now, there's a bunch of files it created for us. So we go back into here, and yeah, we can see a bunch of these files. And these are the two files we care about. So we've got the copykit infra app and the copykit infra stack. A stack is kind of like you can think of it as a logical grouping of AWS resources. So in this diagram, the stack would be this whole thing here. So this is the application we're creating. And then this would be a resource, and this Lambda function would also be a resource. So first, let's get started creating just this actual Lambda function with CDK. Now, I've actually made another video on how to get started with CDK and Lambda functions in particular. So if you're a little bit confused at any point, then I recommend you maybe take a pause and check out that video, or just get some examples and tutorials on CDK first. Otherwise, I'm just going to go through this quite briskly so that we can get to the end of the project. So the first thing I'm going to do is import Lambda. Well, it already gives us examples of how to import things, so I'm just going to copy that here. But instead of SQS, I'm going to put Lambda, so that's our serverless compute. And now delete all of this stuff here. And I can create a new function like this. So I just give it a name, new Lambda function. This will attach it to this stack, and I'm going to call it API function. And now I need some props as well for this. So it needs to have runtime, code, and handler at the very basic. So our runtime is going to be Python. Let's use Python 3.9. Good to have the new stuff. And then code, wait, hold on, what was the other stuff? Code and handler. So the code is basically where the code is that we're going to run in this Lambda function, like where is the actual file in the app. So this one is here, which is one level above this infrastructure folder in a folder called app. So we have to tell it that. And it has a helper function here called code from asset that lets us pass in the path of the code, the local path. So we're going to do just that here, app. I think it's basically just everything in app, so we don't have to do anything else. It's going to copy that whole folder up in there. And finally, we need handler, which is what is the method or the module it runs once we invoke this function. So that should be the name of our file. So it would be this one, copykit API. Hold on, we don't actually have an entry point for this function yet. So this is a FastAPI application, but we're going to host it inside a Lambda function, which says we need a handler function for us to start, which is the function that it calls in order to kickstart this. So there's actually another tool we need for this. It wraps the entire FastAPI in a handler so that we can use it with Lambda. And it's called mangum. So we're going to install that first. Like this. Okay, when that's installed, we should be able to just use it in our application. We'll import it here. And then we can wrap it like this. Handler equals mangum, and then we wrap the API app. So now we actually have we will actually have a handler function which Lambda can invoke, and it's gonna reroute the input to each of these routes that we created. So let's go ahead and put that here. So the way we do that is we write the name of the file first. So it'll be this copykit _ API, and then the name of the function, this is handler. Okay, so I think this is now enough to create a basic Lambda function. If I run this, it should succeed, and I should get this function existing in my AWS account, so we can try that. Although I don't expect it to work yet because we're probably still missing quite a bunch of stuff, but let's just try that anyway. So in order to deploy something to a CDK, first of all, I'm in this directory, I've made these changes. The first thing you're going to need to do is run CDK bootstrap with your account number and your region. I've already run this, so if I run it again, I don't think anything special is going to happen. But if you're using CDK for the first time, make sure that you run this so that it creates the initial resources it needs to continue using it. Yep, so this one has already been bootstrapped and no changes has to be made. Okay, so once we are sure that CDK has been bootstrapped in this region and this account, we can actually just write CDK deploy to build and deploy this infrastructure. So once I run this, I should have a Lambda function that I can see in my AWS account, and I can try to run it. It's not going to work though because we're still missing quite a few things, which I'll get to later. When we run CDK deploy for the first time, or when things change policies like permissions, it might prompt you to, with something like this, to accept the changes. So in this case, I just press yes and let it keep doing its job. Now this process to create the CloudFormation stack can take a while, and sometimes it gets stuck as well. I think mine's actually stuck right now because it's not updating anymore. But this is an asynchronous operation, so if you cancel it, you can actually go to your AWS account to see the current results. So if I go to my AWS account and click on CloudFormation, make sure the region's the same one that you have selected to use, by the way. I normally use US East 1 for prototypes just because it's the region where most services are available. So let's go to CloudFormation, and we should see our new stack being created there. So yep, the one that we created is just here. Just ignore all these, this identical one underneath. I sort of did this project quickly beforehand just to make sure it worked before I made a tutorial. But the one we care about is this one. So if I click into it, we can see the actual project gets created and the resources we wanted are here. So we only created a Lambda function, which we can see here. It created a Lambda function, a role, and some metadata, but we don't need to worry about these two things. And if I click on this one, we'll get taken directly to our Lambda function. And here's my Lambda function. And you can see it actually copied the two source files I had there, and you can see my code is here. So I can just test this function on its own quickly by doing this, and then I'll just make a hello world test event. But I'm really just expecting this to fail. If we run test now and actually look at the output, what we should see: unable to import module, no module named FastAPI. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, we don't have any of these dependencies in this closure. So if you actually look at our function here, we don't have any of this stuff. We don't have this one, we don't have this one. So we're going to solve that problem by adding a base layer to this container. This base layer is kind of like a bunch of pre-installed stuff that our app can use. Now this part is a little bit complicated. I had to look up quite a few tutorials to figure out how to do this. So don't worry if you don't follow along just yet. You can just copy the source code or just take the code and use it for your application. But the key to understanding all of this, I wouldn't say it's an important part of this project at the moment. So first, to get started with this, I'm going to create a folder called Lambda base layer. And I'm going to create a few files in here. So first of all, I'm going to create a Docker file. Don't worry if you don't know how this works at the moment. It's basically just instructions to create a container and run a couple of things inside a kind of an isolated environment. And we're going to use that to build our base layer, which we are going to upload as part of our infrastructure. So I've got my Docker file. I'm also going to create a helper script to create the base layer for me and export it as a zip. So I'm going to call it generate base layer.shell, and I'm going to also create a requirements text, which is all the Python dependencies I want. So the Python dependencies I want include FastAPI, mangum that we added earlier, and OpenAI. And maybe I'll add requests as well, just to make HTTP requests easier, although I'm not sure if I'm going to use it yet. So I have my requirements.txt here. The next step is I need a Docker file. So I'm just going to copy something I prepared earlier here. I'll talk about this briefly. It starts using an Amazon Linux image, and then it installs Python 3.7. I should be using 3.9, but I don't think this is available yet on the repository, so I'm using 3.7 for now, which should be fine. And then I set up pip, I install a base virtual environment so that I can install my dependencies. Then I copy this requirements text into this container and I run pip install. So then you should see it installing all of my dependencies. And then I zip it up and, well, I just have to do this so that the Docker container has an entry point. So once I do that, I should be able to run this Docker file and get that zip out. But that's a couple of commands still that I don't want to remember, so I'm going to, again, automate that a little bit with a helper function that I prepared earlier here. So this is exactly what we're going to do. We're going to use Docker to, firstly, we're going to remove the container if it exists, because I don't want to duplicate or recreate in this container. And then I'm going to build the base image, and I'm going to call it base layer using this Docker file, which is this dot, means this directory. And then I'm going to rename it to layer container. And then I'm going to copy the zip file that's created inside the layer container into this directory so that I can use it as part of my infrastructure. I'm going to save that. And now let's test to see if it works. So let's go into our Lambda base layer here. Let's just make sure that we have Docker and it has a version. Okay, so that's the one I'm going to be using. And then, so I've got a function now, generate base layer. Well, I can't run that yet because I need to make it executable. So I'm going to do change mod plus x and then generate base layer. So now I should be able to run it. Okay, there we go. So here you can see it's actually doing all of this stuff, installing all of these dependencies within this containerized environment. And then it's going to zip it up for me so I can add it to my Lambda function and have it available for my app. And anytime I want to have a new dependency, I can just add it to that requirements text and run this again. Okay, so now my base layer zip is created, and I can confirm that by here. I see that there's a layer zip. Now I don't want to accidentally commit this because zip files can be quite big. So I'm going to quickly add it to my git ignore before I forget. Just going to ignore any files with zip extension. This will cause it to be ignored by my git. So yeah, it doesn't show up there, which is good. Okay, so now I have the zip file. Let's add it to our infrastructure. So we go back here And we're going to need to create a new object, which is a layer. It's going to be using this Lambda layer version. And this, I'm going to call it base layer. And I'll need a couple of props as well. So this props I need, I basically need code, compatible runtimes, license. Okay, I think this is, I'm just going to do the bare minimum. So for code, it's the same interface. We use Lambda code from asset, except this time I'm going to put in my Lambda base layer folder, and it's going to be the zip file, layer.zip. And then I think I need to also specify compatible runtime so that it will work with my my Lambda function here. So we are using Python 3.9 here, so that's all I'm going to add to it at this point. Okay. So now I've got my layer, I've got my Lambda, so I want to make this layer a part of this Lambda, so I just have to specify that here with layers, and it's an array. Okay. So if I deploy this again, I should now have this layer as part of my Lambda function. Let's give that a shot. Okay, so I've just redeployed the stack here, so now the function should have the layer. If I go back to my Lambda function and refresh it, I don't know if I'm going to see any changes in the code, but we can test it again, and hopefully the error we saw about the missing dependency should be gone. Okay, so we go here, we run the same test, and now I have a different error. So I guess that's good, because now it confirms that we've successfully imported the dependencies at least. It says unable to determine handler from trigger event. I guess this is because our test event isn't configured as a HTTP request. So we're going to make a new test event, and I'm not entirely sure if this is going to work, but let's just give it a shot. I'm going to make something called an API Gateway AWS proxy, which if we look in our diagram here, that's the kind of input we're going to be receiving from the user once this is all set up. This is going to be a proxy request. So I'm going to try to use that, and it creates a sort of like a bunch of template things for me here. So there's this path, or we have an HTTP method and a path, so I'm going to go ahead and just change all of those first to something that we accept, which we know from our project we have, let's see, where is it? We have a path here, let's say generate snippet. So let's take that as our path, but we also know that we need a prompt input. So let's put the prompt as, I guess, coffee, our favorite. Okay, so this is going to be our path now. I'm not sure if, actually, no, it has query strings here, so maybe this is how I can do it instead of putting it into that. I don't know actually if I need the whole query string. Let's just try it with that first. Okay. So let's have that. Let's not have any of this stuff here. Let's have that. I don't know what else there is. We need to, okay, there's a bunch of stuff. I'm just looking for things I have to replace. Okay, so there's one more here. All right. So I've got to make a new test event that mocks the input from API Gateway. Let's run that as a test and see if anything changes. Okay, we got a different error now. So we can see our output from this thing, generate upbeat branding snippet for coffee, blah, 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 blah. And of course, we have an OpenAI error, no API key provided. Well, obviously, because when we run it on our local terminal, we set it in our environment variable. But now that we put it in our Lambda function, that environment variable is no longer available. So we have to add that somehow back into our Lambda function. Back to our infrastructure, we can actually add environment variables by using this key here, environment, and we can do it like this. So we want to set that, and we want to set it to the key value. But we don't actually want to store this secret key inside our code, because if it's available or it's on our Git commit history, then people can find it, and then you don't want people to have your secret key. Firstly, that's against the terms and conditions of most services, but also it means somebody can just use your API on your credit card or on your billing account and cost you a lot of money without any benefit to you. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to create a .env file, which is hidden by default in here, where we're going to put our key. Now, I'm actually going to copy my key from this OpenAPI, and I'm going to use this key for now, but I'm going to delete it later. So I'll create a .env file like this, and it's got my API key here, which I'm going to disable this later, so I'm not super sensitive about it yet, but I just want to show you how you can do this. So I've got my env file creating my key here. I want to ignore my env file, put it in my git ignore so that it doesn't get committed, because obviously like this one we don't want to commit it with the rest of the code. We want our users to just create this, or whoever's using it to create it with a secret manager or something, so that we don't have to, you know, expose our private keys online. But now I need a way to actually access this. So we can actually do that with a module called .env, which we can install like this. Yarn at .env. And once it's installed, let's go back to our project and actually use it. So, wait, not this one, not this one, not this one. Back to here, we'll have to import it. And then we have to initialize it like that. And now I think we can just use it in our application. So actually, if I just do this, it complains because it says that this can be undefined because it doesn't know what this one is. So I'm not sure. There might be a better way to do this, but I'm just gonna make it an empty string for now if it can't find this environment variable. So now if I commit this, if I deploy this infrastructure again, hopefully I will see a different, or at least hopefully I will not see this API key error anymore. So let's give that a shot. So once again, I've run cdk deploy and my stack has finished updating. I'm going to go back to my Lambda function here and run another test using the same event. So let's go ahead again with that. Okay, this time it works. I can see my AI output here. Our coffee is the perfect pick-me-up, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so now we're happy. Our function is fully working inside of the cloud. So now that our function is working inside of the cloud, I actually want to make it accessible. So it's there, it's running on AWS, but I still can't call it from outside. I can't call it from a URL. So I need to, well, let's go back to our architecture. So we've done this part here. We've done a base layer. We've created this function and we're managing it with CDK. Now we have to do this part, which is add this API gateway integration so that we get that nice endpoint that calls our function. And then we'll have the backend part complete. So let's go back and see what that looks like here. Go back to our infrastructure package. And we're going to need to import another class here, or another set of tools. So it's going to be API gateway. And it's from, well, it's obviously from API gateway. Okay. I know there's a V2 version of this, but I don't know. I think I've done my tutorials with V1, so I'm not going to touch that just yet. But yeah, I'm not sure what that is about. Okay, anyway, so let's go ahead and do this. To create an API, first of all, we have to create an instance of an API. So we'll call it copy kit API. And it will be a new API gateway, and we're going to choose a REST API. So I think this is just the most like standard one. We'll do this. I'm going to call it REST API. And here's our props. So we can give it a name. So I want to call it CopyKit tutorial API. And I think that's pretty much it we have to do for now. So now this exists, I want to actually create this as a proxy for Lambda. So I want it so that if I call this endpoint, oh, by the way, when I create this API, it's going to generate like a really random gibberish endpoint for me. If we want to hook it up with a readable domain, we can do that as well, but I'll do that later because I don't think that's important yet for the purpose of this project. So I'll maybe talk about that later. But for now, just know that once we create this, we're going to get the actual endpoint for us, and it's going to be like a long, not very human readable endpoint, but it's enough for us to use. However, we still need to actually integrate this with our Lambda function. So the way it works is that this sort of connection here is done by something called a API integration, and Lambda integrations is one of the ways to do that. But we not only just want a Lambda integration, we want a proxy integration, which means that all the details of the request here are not really processed or unpacked by API Gateway at all, but instead it's sort of passed on wholesale to the Lambda function, and Lambda can decide what to do with that. The reason we need that is because we already have an API processing layer, which is the FastAPI framework, which we created here. So we need to know the routes, we need to know the query parameters like these. If we strip that out before the Lambda function gets it, then this won't work. And it's not just this, but later on we're going to find things like headers, authentication, and even things like CORS, cross-origin access headers need to be managed by this. So let's go ahead and add this Lambda integration to our infrastructure stack. Firstly, we can actually define this as a resource. So we can say Lambda API integration like this, and it's going to be a new API gateway Lambda integration. There we go. And the handler is going to be a Lambda function. So that's just going to be our API Lambda there. Okay. So we have that now, but we also need to make it a proxy. So we're going to add a proxy resource to it. We do it like this. Oh, whoops. We need to add a proxy resource to this REST API. So we're going to do root add proxy, which is just going to pass everything through. And then the argument we're going to have is the default integration is going to be this integration we just created. I can probably just even inline this, maybe make it easier. I think that might just work like that. Okay, so let's try that. Again, just going to run my magic deploy script and see what happens with this new stack. So I just run cdk deploy, and it's asking me to confirm a bunch of changes here. Again, because we've added an API, there's a lot of permission changes taking place. So it's just asking us to verify that it's correct. And you can see when we add the API integration, there's a lot more roles and policies created so that Lambda and API Gateway can talk to each other. Okay, now my API has finished deploying. You can see that in the output here, it's actually given us the new endpoint for our API. So we can come and visit this later, but first let's see what it looks like on our actual account. So if I refresh my resources, I can now see a REST API resource, and I can look at it closer here, going into the console. And here we go, we see our API resource, copykit tutorial API, with the root path of this API directed to an integration with our Lambda function here. So this is just gonna pass everything through and send everything back. And if I can even test it from here, so before I test it live using the browser, I can just use this thing here, and now I can do a GET request. So again, let's maybe use one of the paths that we know that works, which is the generate snippet. Again, it's this one here. Let's go back. We're going to call it generate snippet. That's our path, and the prompt is going to be maybe watches. Okay, then I'll just test it. Okay, so it works because now we get this response from our Lambda function. Make a statement with a watch that stands out from the rest, blah, 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 blah. Okay, very cool. Now look at the latency. It's actually pretty bad, almost 3 seconds to get a response. But that's because Lambda functions, as I mentioned, they are offline by default. So look at our diagram here. This thing is offline, which means that we're not paying for it. But when we do need it, it needs to boot up and, you know, basically turn on and run all of this stuff, which can take a little bit of time, in this case 3 seconds. But if it's already online, I think for the next 10 minutes or so, it's going to stay warm, so that when we use it again, the latency is going to be a lot less. In fact, if a lot of people use this, the more people that use it, the better performance you will get out of this Lambda function. So because we just used this recently, let's try this again with a different prompt this time. So let's put in laptop, see what happens, and run test. Okay, the latency is already getting shorter. This time is only 1.3 seconds. I don't know if it's going to improve more than this. We can try it. Boxing. Test. Yeah, it seems to get better and better the faster we use it. Soda. I want to see how low we can get it. Okay. So yeah, Lambda functions, even don't let the sort of upfront latency scare you for cold functions or cold starts. Most applications, it's probably not critical. You can probably withstand a couple of seconds of latency, but it's just good that if you're using Lambda as your backend, just to be aware of this interaction and how this number changes as people use it. All right, so now our API works. Let's actually try using it in the browser. So remember, we have had our endpoint here. Now if I click this, make it go in the browser, this doesn't work. This gives us an internal server error because we actually need the full path and the prompt query for it to pass it successfully through our Lambda function. So let's try that again with generate snippet, and the prompt is, again, coffee, put it there, is our default test. Okay, and now we actually get the input that we want, the output that we want. So now we can change the prompt to different things. We can change it to maybe beach. Come to the beach for a fun, sunny experience, indeed. Okay, cool. So, well, I just realized this might be really small on the video, so let me zoom in a little bit there. So this is very cool. We actually have a public endpoint. We can reach it from anywhere, and we are actually invoking our Python function that we created earlier with this API now, and we also, which is also hooked up to our OpenAI API back there. So I think that that's pretty much this part of the project complete, which is very exciting because we've got the core of it. As soon as we have this API, we can build the front end in many different ways. We can make it an app, we can make it a CLI or a website or even a desktop application. We can integrate it with a bunch of other things. But for the next section, I'm going to show you how I built the actual interface that I'm using for this project using React and TypeScript. And another good thing as well is with this whole API infrastructure, we actually have everything we did here. All of these things in the console that you see here is managed by our code by our CDK package, because you can imagine there's a lot of different options and settings here, and it's going to be a nightmare to remember how to configure this or to check if anything's changed, just to make sure that if you change things and you want to revert back to a previous version, it's really hard if you try to do things with the console. So I recommend that when you do use the console, try to do it as a way to only like read or test things rather than actually build things. And if you're actually going to build something, I do recommend sticking with using infrastructure as code like we did here, so that everything here is managed by this file, and if anything goes wrong, we can just reset it back to this or redeploy it. But that's pretty much it. So that is now our API integration and infrastructure complete, and now we actually have a working public API, and we can move to the next part of this project. And finally, I'm just going to create another checkpoint here, adding all the changes we did recently for the API infrastructure, for the cloud infrastructure. And I'm just going to double check to make sure that we don't have anything any secrets or anything that's unnecessary as part of this commit. Okay, this looks pretty good to me, so I'm going to go ahead and commit it. There we go, and push. Okay, so I've pushed this commit now, so if you just want to work on this section, then make sure that you get the specific commit so that you have just only these changes and you can look at them separately. Okay, so just back to our architecture diagram here. Now that we've done this whole part of the project, we can focus on the actual front-end interface, which is going to be the website, so that our users can just go to the web app and interact with it. And this is pretty much what we're going to try to be building next, where we have the prompt as a text field, and we can type in things to interact with it, and then press submit, and there we will get our result. So let's have a look at how we can create this. The technology I'm going to use is going to be NextJS. So actually these are the requirements of things you might want to know about or want to be familiar with before starting on this section of the project. We're going to be programming in TypeScript language, which is sort of like type-safe JavaScript. So if you know JavaScript already, this will be easier to learn. If you know Python, then I still think it's probably quite easy to learn, but a little, there's a bigger gap than from JavaScript. Node.js is the engine, I guess, we're all going to be running all this stuff on. So it's going to be the runtime we use for the TypeScript. And then we're going to be using the React framework, which is the front-end framework. It's a very popular front-end framework right now, so that's why I've chosen it for this project. And on top of React, there's also the NextJS framework, which turns the React into a statically hosted site. I mean, React's already static by default, but this takes it to another level and just bakes all of the HTML and styling into a very fast page to load. Like all of these things are kind of very integrated. So using NextJS implies that you're using React, which implies you're using Node. And with Node, you can either use JavaScript or TypeScript, but we're going to use TypeScript because it's better. So yeah, again, just to go over the technologies we use, there's Next.js here, and there's the setup documentation, and there's React here. So just reactjs.org, and just have a look at the tutorial if you're new to it. And yeah, let's get started. So we will go to the Next.js getting started page and just run this to create a new project in our directory. So I'm back in my root directory here. I'm going to list the files, and I'm going to create it as a third folder in here because, again, it is a separate project from our app or our infrastructure. So I'll do yarn create next app with a TypeScript flag. Just run that. It's going to ask us for a couple of prompts, so I'm just going to call it copy kit site, like this. And it's just going to install everything we need. Okay, great. So once we have this, we can see a couple of instructions. Once we're in this copykit site directory, we can run yarn dev, yarn build, yarn start, So it says here, we suggest you begin by typing this. So let's go ahead and try that out. So let's go into the site, and then we run yarn dev. Okay, so it started the server here. So if I just click on this, I get taken to my site, which is being hosted right now. Okay, so just out of the box, this is already what I'm getting when I create a new NextJS project. So we're going to edit this here. See, it says, get started by editing pages index.tsx. And I'm actually going to move this window to the side so we can sort of see it as we're editing it live. So let's shift all of this stuff here. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. And see, we can shift this one as well. Okay, I'll have to make this smaller. Go. I hope you can still read that. Okay, maybe I'll just make it a little bit bigger. Kind of clunky. All right, so we've got this new project here, copykit site, and we have a bunch of folders. It says get started by editing pages index. So if I look at the index page, this is my app here. I actually need to move this window a little bit so there's more space, otherwise we can't read. And a tight screen space. Okay, so pretty much this is, if you look at this here, if you know React, then you can understand how this maps to all of this stuff, but we're going to get rid of all of that. We're going to keep the head because that's kind of like the heading of the site here, but I'm going to change it a little bit. I'm going to say copykit tutorial and see AI generated marketing, like that. And then generate branding snippets for your product. Cool, so just a bit of metadata there. So now the site has actually changed, and I can even have an icon here, which is the favicon.ico, which I think in this project it's in the public folder right there. So I'm going to go ahead and change that with an icon I've prepared for this already, which you could just use any image editor to do, and you just have to name it favicon.ico. So I've got a file here that I'm going to copy in, which is called copykit.png. It's just the logo icon I want to use for this, and I can replace this one, this default one that the project comes with. I'll just delete this, and I'll just rename this to the one that I want, which is favicon.ico, and I'm going to get rid of the PNG extension there. So now, I don't know if this will show up right away if I refresh this. Sometimes it's cached in the browser, so you might not see it appear right away, but soon enough we're going to see it update to this little guy. Okay, so I've got that, and now I want to get rid of all this stuff here so I can actually write my own application. So let's just delete everything in here. Now if I save this, this should be on hot refresh, so it should update this view as I'm working on it. Let's go ahead and just block out the site. So by that I mean just get all the major elements in place. So if we go back, this is the first. So okay, so first thing, we have two pages, and they have a little bit of a difference in layout. So let's keep that in mind, but we also have elements that are common between them. So the first thing is there is a header element. So let's start by creating that copykit like this. Okay, so it shows up here. I'm not going to care about formatting too much just yet. With React, it's probably better to break things up into components so we don't get too confused like working in a big file. So I'm going to create another folder here called components, and I'm going to actually make a copykit.tsx component, which is going to be my main app. So I'm not going to actually write any code in here, but I'm going to put it into here instead. So the way we do this, we make a new function that extends from React functional component, and we use the syntax, and then we return. And then this one can be a div, so we just write regular HTML here, hello. And I'm just going to export that as the default export from this file. So now if I, instead of doing that, I delete that and just write this as an element like this, it should show up. But first I need to import this. So I'll import it here. Now it shows up as hello. So I'm not going to edit anything on this page anymore. Instead, I'm going to edit it from here. So let's start with our header. And now let's start with our input field. So let's look at our sample again. Let's start with this page. So I have my header there already, and then I need this text. Tell me what your brand is about, and I will generate copy and keywords for you. So let's make that a paragraph there. And that should show up. Let's have a look as that shows up. Okay. And I need a text box input. So that could probably just be an input field here. Yep, it shows up. Okay, so now I've got the input, and I need to actually make it a type of text. I think that's already the default, but let's just put that anyways. So now I can type stuff in. I might even want it to show a default value, just so users know what, like an example of what they need to type. So if it's completely empty, it'll have a default value already, a placeholder value already in the field for me. And then I'm going to need a submit button. So that'll just be underneath it like this. So let's add that as well. So this will be a type of a button there, and the word is going to be submit, like that. Okay. So don't worry about the styling for now. As I mentioned, we're going to be styling this later on. Okay, so now I have something and I type submit. Obviously nothing happens because we didn't program anything into this. So let us maybe start with that and make this interactive. So first of all, we probably need to store this value that we're typing in here, because we want to use this as a variable to submit. So we're going to use something called React hooks. I'm just going to change my spaces so that it's consistent with how this is being formatted. Okay, so yeah, we're going to use React hooks as a way to store this variable, and we're going to name this prompt text, or maybe just prompt, and then set prompt is our setter function for it. To do hooks, we do React use state, which can be empty string to start with. I'll have to import this as well. Okay. And I want my input to update my prompt whenever I type something. So on change, it's going to be an anonymous function that updates, well, it's going to set my prompt to whatever is being typed in. So that would be current target dot value. Okay. And we can check that by every time reloading this, we console log the prompt. So now when I inspect this, and if I go to the console, let me clear all this stuff here. And if I type it, you can see it's actually updating. It's actually printing this prompt as it's getting updated in here. Okay, so that's pretty good. Now, I also probably want to set the value to the prompt just so that it's always in sync. It's like updated with each other. So this actually shows what value it has in here. Let me just refresh this page. Not sure what that error is, but yeah, seems to work for now. Okay, so submit still doesn't do anything, but we already store this input at least. So I'm going to delete this console log because it's going to clutter my output and I don't need it anymore. Now I want a function for this submit button to use. So I'm going to make another function in here. I'm going to call it onSubmit. Be an anonymous function as well. And then I'll make it log something like this. Submitting prompt. Okay, so let's see if we can hook that up to the button. So the button will have an on click, and then it would just we just use this function when we click it. So I'm gonna run it again, clear the output, submit. So now we can see submitting hello world. All right, cool. So I want it to make it so that when I click submit, it hits this endpoint that we created in the previous section and uses this prompt and then shows this output back on the screen. So I've got the endpoint here. So let's put this here somewhere. And I'm actually going to have to use a fetch request to do that. Okay, so the way I can call an external API from React or from JavaScript in general, I can use this fetch command, and I just have to put in my endpoint. I'm going to put in the backticks because it allows me to format this input, and I'm going to change this prompt to be the one that my users have created. So here is what my endpoint looks like. Generate snippet, except I don't actually just want generate snippet, I want both generate snippet and keywords. So I'm actually going to change my API to that. Because remember, earlier we created a few different APIs, and one of them is generate snippet and keywords, like this. And I'm actually going to extract this out into a separate variable, just so it's easier to see. Actually, this whole thing, including the name of the API. So I'm going to do it like this. Check this out. And I'm going to call it, I'll just put it here for now. Okay. So I'm going to call it an endpoint and put it here like this. And now it will actually fetch this URL. Okay, so now that we've got the endpoint, I just want to test it, and just after I fetch this, I just want to log whatever it returns. So I don't want to even do anything with it yet. Just try to call this endpoint and then log it and see what happens. So let's try that here. I'm going back to my site and then hit submit. Okay, so I get this error. Cross request origin blocked, blah, 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 blah. All right. So this is happening because we haven't enabled this cross origin request. So this is called CORS. And if you hit learn more, it'll tell you more about that. But that basically means that we haven't attached certain information to the API response to tell the browser that this is fine for us to display. We could do that earlier in like this API, for example, because this doesn't check whether it has those headers or not. So this is something that's kind of validated at the browser level. So we're going to go ahead back to our API and add that in. And we're going to have to deploy our API again, actually. So we go to our API here, and we need to add a header to each of these responses. But OpenAI actually, FastAPI actually makes it really easy for us to do that by providing something called middleware. So I looked this up online, and I'm just going to copy the code that I found there. So first of all, we are going to import the CORS middleware, and then we're going to wrap it around all of the routes that we're using here. So it's going to add these CORS headers. If you don't know what CORS is at the moment, you don't have to worry for now, but we're just going to add this snippet in, which you don't have to care about what any of these does. It basically just allows this stuff to show up when we run it in the browser if the URL is different from the URL of the of the API that we're using here. So this URL is different from the localhost, so that's why it's giving me this problem. But if we put this in, it should fix this. So I've added that. This is already part of FastAPI, so we don't have to add any new packages, and we should just be able to save this and redeploy it, and then hopefully we can try this again and it will work. So I'm gonna open another terminal window because I want to leave my server running, and go back out to my infrastructure package. Make sure I'm using Node version 16. Just quick setup, and then run another deployment of my application. Let's try this again. I'm just going to refresh the page. I'll put in a new prompt. Submit. Now you can see we have an actual response and the status is 200. Okay, but we actually need to get the data out of this response. So like somewhere in here, there is the response body hidden away. So we can do that by going here and first converting this into JSON, or getting the JSON representation of this. We can do it like this. JSON. And then we can console log that actual result. So let's have a look at what happens when we do that. Let me submit this again, clear this. So now we can actually get our snippet, and we get our keywords as well, which is an array. Okay, perfect. So now we actually have the data in here that we're ready to display. So let me make a component to show this information. First, we're going to need more hooks because we need to store this. Anytime we need to store information and have it update the state, we're going to need a hook. That's basically how we create interactive elements with React, or anything that needs to update. So I'm going to create one for the snippet. It's also going to be a string. Starts with empty string. And then I'm going to create one for the keywords as well. This is not going to be a string. It's actually going to be a list or an array, so we'll do that. Okay. And instead of just console logging, I'm going to create another function called onResult. And then it's going to take in this vague JSON data, which I will need to say that it can be anything. But we know that it has this snippet key and this keyword key. So I'm going to set the snippet to data.snippet and do the same with keywords. Okay, so now I will have these variables available to use, and I could just confirm that by logging it when I do this. So I'm just going to log both of them instead of logging them here. And now I'll just pass this in instead. So actually, I don't know if I should log it here, because setting it here might not actually resolve this variable before the log happens. So I might just log it out here instead. That. Okay. As you can see, it's already logging empty string and empty array, but if I type in something and submit it, yeah, it populates these variables and it logs them out. Okay, great. So I don't need to log them anymore. I know that they work. I want them to instead display on my page. So I can create another element here. I can do Well, let's say I could do this. I can make a results element that doesn't show up unless I actually have the results. So let's do this, results element. And it's going to start off as null. And I'm going to render it underneath the button. So I've got my results here. But if I have results, so I'm going to have another state say has result. Tell me whether or not I have results to display. And it's going to be false by default. But if I do have results, I will make this an element that shows them this result. Okay, like this. So first of all, I need a snippet. So I can do it like this, snippet equals, then I put my snippet variable in there. Then same with keywords. Oops. Go. Okay. When I get my results, I also have to set this hook to true. Okay, so now it should be ready. Let's try that again. Run my submit function. All right, and now it shows up. Snippet, coffee is the perfect pick-me-up, beans are roasted to perfection, we have varieties of flavor, and then here are the keywords. It's in an array, so it's just kind of all stuck together. Okay, so I actually want to make the keywords look a little bit nicer. I'm actually going to join the array on a delimiter. So the array has this function called join, and then I can put in a string, and it's going to put this in between each of the elements, like that. Okay, there we go. Okay, so in terms of functionality, I think we pretty much have it. All right, so if we compare this to this sort of prototype that I'm aiming for, there's still a couple of things that we're missing. So first of all, we're missing this like limit on the characters. We want it to cap out at a certain limit. And disable the submit button. Also, notice that when we do submit this input, the button is disabled while it's loading. And when the results show up, it actually shows on a separate page with a back button. So let's go ahead and implement this structure first. And then I guess we can call it a wrap with the functionality. So right now everything's just kind of happening all on the same page, and there's no length validation, and the submit button, you can like sort of just spam this and it's not going to be good. So first things first, let's separate these things into two separate pages. For that, I'm going to actually create two new components for that. I'm going to create a form component, which is going to be my input stuff. And then I will create a results component. This. And so we already created components before. It's just that. Okay. This has to return a React element, JSX element, like this. We're just going to copy the same thing over to the form. I usually like to put a placeholder text just so I can quickly prototype it before I, dig in to the content. Okay, so we've got our common element. So we're always going to show the header. But now I want this part in the form. Actually, this whole thing here. I'm going to take that out. And now it's all gone from here, and I'm going to put in the form instead. Obviously, I'm missing some information, so I have to pass that in as props. So I need a submit action, and I also need the prompt value, and I also need this set prompt function. So I can create an interface for the props, form props, which is kind of the arguments that I'm going to put in. And I can specify that it uses form props like this. So it's like a type. And then this is how it's going to get that information. And form props needs to have the prompt, a set prompt function, and an onSubmit function. So I have to declare that. The prompt is easy. It's just going to be a string. The set prompt, it's a function, but I'm just going to declare it as any to make it easy for now. And then submit as well, even though there's probably better typing for this. At the moment, this is all I care about, just to get it working. And then we're going to have to make this, call this from the props itself. So it'll be props set prompt, props on submit, and then prompt this. Okay, now I got my form. Let's actually put it back into this app. So I can do it like this. So that imports it for me here. I'll close it, but it's going to complain because I'm missing the properties that I need. So I'm going to just add the missing attributes with a sort of auto help complete function. And now I have stubs for each of these things. So set prompt is just going to be the set prompt function we created earlier up here. And same for each of these things. We're just going to word for word use the exact name we gave them. And this is our prompt. Okay, so now I have a form element. I can display it. Just put it back where it used to be. There. But this is a problem. I still have both of these elements, and I only want to display one of them. I need to have a state that tells me which elements I'm going to display. Luckily, we already have that. We have the has results Boolean value here. So we can use that to decide. But first, I'm going to actually extract the results element as well. I'll just copy that. And same thing. I'm going to put it here instead. Whoops, something went wrong. Oh, I just forgot a curly bracket. Okay. Oh. And so, similar to the form, I also need some props for this. So just create an interface really quick. And this one needs snippets and keywords. A little bit more straightforward. Keywords is going to be a string list. There we go. And again, we just wire this up. Okay, so now I go back to this guy and I make my results element similar to the form one. I'll just do it like that. And then get autocomplete to stub it out for me. A bunch of things. And now I can just pass in the values I have. Okay, so once I save that, it's still showing up like this, which is fine. I mean, we didn't change anything about the way it looked. We just organized the code better so that we now have a form component and a results component separately. But now I want to only show one of them at a time. So we're going to have to make some changes to this thing. First of all, I'm going to call this a displayed element, and I'm going to make it null still. So I will set this according to what this Boolean flag says, and I'm only going to display that element on its own. So if I have the results, the displayed elements will be this results view. Otherwise, it will be this form view, so I can get rid of this now. Oops. Get rid of this and do displayed element equals form prompt. Okay, there we go. So it's only going to be one or the other. If I refresh this, well, there we go. I only have the results now because this Boolean is true. But I need a back button as well, because if I fill this form in here and I go to the results, I need a way to click back. See, this is the button I need. And I probably also want to separate all these things out. This one doesn't have it yet. So let's start by adding the back button. I mean, the button itself is easy enough to add. We just do this here. Okay, but now we need to make it work. Click. Well, the problem is we can't actually do anything to the app itself from the scope of this. So we're going to need to pass in the action that causes this to go back. So I want to actually declare this as another props on back, and it's going to be any because it's going to be a function. So we're going to pass that in. Obviously this is complaining because well, first of all, I haven't wired this up properly. Okay, and we also need to pass in this on back to this one as well. So again, let's just add missing attributes, and now I have this on back one here. We reformat it so we can see it. Now we need a function for this. So when I press back, I want it to reset. So I'm going to call this a reset function. Actually, I'm going to call it on reset just to make it consistent with these. And when we reset, we set results to false, and we set the prompt to empty. We set the prompt to empty. So let's try this now, because I think that, oh, by the way, we don't need any of this. I think that now when I see the result and I click back, it's going to call this, which empties the prompt, but also sets the results to false. Even though the keywords and the snippets will still exist, we're going to ignore that because this condition won't enter, and we're going to go back to the normal form. So let's see if that actually happens. Okay, so now we have the results view, and we click back, and now we're back at our form view, and the prompt is empty again. Let's actually finish off our results view by, breaking these things up into separate sections, because right now it's just all kind of clumped together. So I'm just going to do it very roughly, because we're not at the styling section yet where we make it look nice, but I do want it to at least have the same functionality here. So first of all, we're back at the results view. We're going to get rid of this, and I'm going to say something like this here. Div. So the snippet is going to be a heading to this. Oops. Close that tag wrong. Okay. Make this bold as well. Okay. And we'll do the same for each of these sections. So I have this one here. Yeah, don't worry if it looks a little bit messy for now. Just trying to get things in order. This one here, keywords. There we go. And in the prototype, we also have the prompt up there. Get rid of that. Just going to copy this thing again. Oh, but that also means we need to add the prompt to this because we don't have it yet. So I'm going to have to add it here. Prompt as a string. Prompt. Okay. So now the prompt can be set like that. And now this can be set as well. Okay, so yeah, the styling is ugly, but we at least have something that resembles this. Actually, I might want to do this as well. So I actually break this into separate tags. Right now we just made one string, which we added this like comma to, but we can actually make these all separate elements. So let's try that for now. Keywords element. Guess it can be keyword elements as an array for now. Then we'll create a loop. For each one, I want to create a new element. And the word, well, inside it's going to be the keyword. So it's going to be props keyword I, like this. I have to add it to the array. Push. Well, I'm just going to call this element, so it's a little, like, I don't like it when two very long variables have just s at the end to make them different. It makes it kind of confusing to read. So let's just be more clear with that. And now I'm going to put this element instead of my string here. So we'll see how that looks. Okay, so now it's in a list. But you might notice I also have this very big red error box here. It says each child in a list should have a unique key prop. Basically, this is just a React thing so that it knows how to refresh its elements. All that means is that because we're adding this to a list, we have to add a key flag as well. And each of these keys have to have a unique value. So I'm just going to put I here because I know that I will be different for each of them. And this is actually, sufficient enough to make it refresh without any errors. And also, just for fun, I'm going to put like a little hashtag here. So, hashtag here so that our elements each have this hashtag around it. Okay, so I think functionally that looks pretty good. That's kind of what we have here, even though we don't have the theming, but like the data is all there. So I'm happy with that for now, even though it's a little bit ugly. So we'll go back. Okay, so now the last thing we need is this input validation field, making sure that it sort of doesn't let it go more than this many amount of words. So we can do that here. Oh, and we also need it to disable this button when it's loading. All right, so first of all, since this is an element, we need to pass in a couple more information. We have to say, is it loading? Call it a Boolean. And do I want to put the limit in here? Maybe I'll just hard code it for now. So I'm going to put the limit first, and then I'll put the loading thing to disable it afterwards. The limit's probably a little bit easier to do. Let's create a variable. Let's make it 32 characters, just like in our example. And we're going to make a Boolean here if the prompt is at limit, which we can check by doing prompt.length is less than or equal to, actually, let's change this. Let's say is prompt valid. Prompt.length is less than equals to 32. So if this is true, then we're good. Otherwise, it's not good. We also need a place to display it. So I displayed it under the input button here. So let me create another div and just put it under the input, this. And I literally just have a number that looks like that, 32 out of 32. Okay, but this first number needs to be the length of my prompt. So I'm just going to copy the prompt length. This. Okay, so it's 0, but now it goes up. Obviously, I can go over the limit because I haven't done anything to prevent it from doing that yet. This needs to be my character limit number. Okay, there we go. And now I need to prevent it from updating my prompt if it's at the character limit. So actually I can do that either in here, but I actually prefer to do it at this set prompt function since we already have this function. Oh, I need to, okay, so before we do that, I actually also need to disable the button. So to disable the button, we can use a flag called disabled, and I can use it if not. So if the prompt isn't valid, then now the button is disabled because it's over 32 characters. But I can still keep typing though. This is kind of lame. So now it's enabled again if it's under this. But let's make it so that you can't type when you hit this number as well. We don't actually need these things to check in here. I mean, we've got the limit here. I don't like to duplicate the limit. Actually, yeah, I don't want to duplicate the limit, so I'm just going to actually make this a prompt as well. Character limit is a number. And we're going to just replace that with this, and replace that with this here. So now we're going to need this told to us from the outside. So make another constant here, character limit. All right, and now I pass it in. Okay, now it shows up there. So everything is working again, but I want to make it so that I can't input prompts that are bigger than this. So I am going to go to this. Yeah, I could probably just do it in the form. So right now I set this value, but I want it to be a little bit smarter. So I'll wrap this in another function, update prompt value, which is going to take the text, and I'm going to say if text length is under or equal to prompt's character limit, then I'm going to update it. So I'm going to use the same function to do that, except with the text value instead. Okay, and now, instead of doing this, I'm going to run my helper function here, update prompt value with this, which is going to validate that it's actually less or equal to the character limit beforehand. So let's give that a go. This time I should not be able to type more than 32, which is good. I should make this. Okay, so now I can't go over. Okay, so I've got my limits, I've disabled the submit button. Now the only thing left is to also make this disabled when I've already clicked it, because I don't want to be able to double click it. Like, I could just show you. If I do coffee like this and then I click it a few times, you can see it's already submitting it 3 times. So I'm making 3 API calls and it's just, you know, being chaotic. I don't want to do that. So let's make it so that once we hit submit, we can't do it again until we get the results, or it fails. Which, by the way, we have to add a failure condition, but I'm gonna, in the interest of time, I'm gonna skip that for now. Okay. So this is going to be my loading flag. It starts off as false, but when I submit something, I'm going to set this to true. And it's going to stay true until we get the results back, which then I'm going to set it back to false. When I reset, I probably should set this to false as well, just in case. Right. All right, so now if I try this again, if I hit submit, well, actually, it still works because I didn't disable it yet. Okay, so now I actually have to use the isLoading element, go to my form element and then set this to this value because it was always hard-coded to false. Now this should work. Type in my value and then I hit submit. Okay, it still doesn't work. Let's debug and see what's wrong. So when I hit submit, it sets loading to true, and I have the form disabled. Oh, obviously I didn't actually use this inside the form yet, so I have to press disabled is if it's loading, or if the prompt is invalid, it will be disabled. But this has to be the prompts is loading. Okay, I think now it should work. Okay, so I hit it, and now it's great. Yeah, I can't click it again. So it actually has to finish each request before I can do it. Yep. Okay, and that pretty much wraps up the React sort of programming side. We've got it running on our local host. So the next step is let's get this deployed somewhere so that we can access it on the internet and getting that one step closer to having a web app. Now that we have the website working, we're not going to do the Tailwind styling just yet because I don't think that is the most important part of this app. So we're actually going to skip the styling part and figure out how we can host this application that we've built locally somewhere publicly so that we have a fully functional web interface. So this is going to be what we're going to focus on here, which is hosting this React frontend on Vercel. So now I've built the React Next.js frontend and we've tested it locally. The next goal for me is to get this uploaded so that we can access it anywhere from the internet. Okay, so the easiest way I found to actually deploy this site, like as a static site, and it's going to be free as well, is actually using a web service called Vercel. They're actually the developers of Next.js. So this is Next.js here, but it's developed by Vercel. They also let you deploy it here. So if you click on deploy Next.js in seconds, they're not exaggerating. You can actually use this service to deploy it really fast and for free. Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff you can read up on it here. If we click deploy now, we have to import a Git repository. So there's a couple of things here, and this is the one I was just working on now. So I'm just going to click import, and I'm going to call it copy Git tutorial. That's pretty good. So now I have to select the root directory. We're a little bit different here in that the project repository contains the full stack of the application. It's a monolith, so Vercel doesn't recognize where the app is, so we actually have to select that. So we go into here and see our site. It knows that that's a Next.js app. It can figure it out. So we can click that and continue. And I'm going to just make sure that it really understands it's Next. So I'm going to click that here as well. Everything, I think we can pretty much keep it as normal for now. Yeah, I don't think we need to do anything else. So let's try that and see if it works. So I'm just going to click deploy. And then we can actually see it building the site and running it live here after I click the deployment. And the cool thing about this as well is later on, if you do make changes to the project, all you have to do is just push the new commits and it's going to kickstart a new deployment. So all you have to do is just work on your project locally like normal, and then every time you do a commit, it's going to update it on the cloud. And after waiting for a while, it's finally done and you get this this nice dashboard. You can just click on it. So if I click on this, I should be able to see the dashboard for the site, production deployment, and here's the domain. So they give you a domain, a vercel.app domain out of the box, although you can configure your own domain as well. Just have to click some of the options here. But this is pretty much what we need at the moment. So if I click that, it sees here. So now this is actually live. If I send this link to a friend or a user, they can actually see this and use it. And let's try to use it now. So let's put this prompt in chocolate like that and submit. And now we can see our app is actually live, functional, and accessible to our users. It doesn't look great. So in the next section or the next video, I will do a tutorial on styling it so that it actually looks nice. But for now, I think that we focused on all of the core functionality and it's actually ready to be used. I think it's time that we can make it look a little bit nicer by integrating TailwindCSS and styling it up a little bit. I'm pretty happy with the progress we've made so far. We actually have the site is live on the public internet and it's all connected with a serverless backend and it's all functional and we can use it, which is excellent. But it still looks really ugly. So as the final step in this project, we are going to make it look nice. And for that, my favorite framework for React front ends is actually TailwindCSS. This is really easy to use. So we're going to go ahead and set that up and just try to give this service that we have a nice quick facelift. And you don't need to be amazing at design or anything to do this. I mean, as I said, Tailwind's easy to use, so I'll show you right now how a couple of small changes can make this look pretty good. And hopefully they'll give you ideas for your own projects. So first of all, we'll have to install Tailwind. So this is just their website here. I'm just gonna go for NextJS integration. So if you click that, they'll have some instructions. So we already have our project. Now we have to install Tailwind. So we just copy this command here. Let's copy this and run it in our site directory. Just going to install it. Okay, so that's done. And next step is we have to add this thing to our Tailwind config. So I'm just going to copy that here. And I have a file. I have a file in here called Tailwind config. So I just copy the content over. So this tells us where our content is, so that it knows when to refresh the Tailwind sort of CSS compilation. So if you actually have more files here that you want to use Tailwind in, you have to add it to the path. And finally, we have to add the Tailwind directives to the CSS. So we just do this and then we can use it. So we've got a global CSS file in here somewhere in the styles. So global, I'm going to delete all this. We don't need this anymore. And just do Tailwind there. Okay. So now when we go back to our site running in the dev, well, all our styles gone. So all our header and everything's gone. But that's fine because now Tailwind is ready for us to use. So this means that we've set it up. Just to check if it's all been set up properly, the first thing we can do is we can actually just try out Tailwind right now. So so in case you haven't used Tailwind before, the way it works is you add classes to your elements that you want to style, and the class names will apply a specific style to them. So you combine them to make certain things look the way you want. So let's look at an example of that. We go to the documentation page here. I don't know how this works, so I guess we can go to something like text size, or maybe just size, font size. There we go. So yeah, we can see examples of this here, and then there's different classes we can use that will change how the text looks. Yeah, so this is the whole typography section here. So we've got like all these type of things. So for example, I want to make my header font bigger. So I want to make it maybe extra large, or maybe even 3 extra large. I can just write that text. And if you have the Tailwind plugin extension for VS Code, just type in Tailwind CSS, it will have actually autocomplete for you. So maybe if I type this text, yeah, so it comes up, so I don't have to know all of these classes by default. So 3 extra large, and I might save it and refresh. I see it come up like this. Okay, so if this is what I'm aiming for, let's break this up one by one. First of all, we need a background color. In fact, you know what? Instead of making this exact thing, I'm going to go for a dark theme. So I'm going to try to do this, but with an inverted dark theme, because I think that might look interesting and it might be a bit different as well. So we don't have to completely clone that first prototype. First of all, we're going to need to change the background color. Now, instead of doing that in an element though, I would actually rather do it at the global level, just because the elements sometimes they don't extend past the top and the bottom of the screen. So I'm just going to do this, and then I can actually use Tailwind in my CSS by using the apply directive. So for background colors, hold on, how do I bring up this command search thing? Oh, escape. Okay, does that work? Oh, no, it doesn't. Yeah, I don't know if there's a hotkey for this. Anyways, BG color, background color. Okay, there we go. So here's an example of how we can do it. We can set the background color, BG. There's a bunch of different colors that they have here. So we actually look at their color. Yeah, okay, I like this Control F much better. Palette, we can use it like this. So let's say I want a really dark one. I can use gray, and then I can use gray 800. So I can apply BG gray 800 like this. Maybe that's too dark. I don't know. Whatever. Let's go for it. And now the background's really dark. Okay, maybe I'll make it even darker. Maybe 900. I'll make it. Okay. Okay, cool. So it works. Let's make it something light for now so we can actually see our black text, and then we can tune it up later. So now I got my background color. Let's put this in a box and make it centered. So I'm not going to keep going back and forth between the Tailwind docs. This is going to take a bit of time. So I'm actually just going to use the Tailwind styling I know, but if you're curious, go and check out these docs yourself or look at some of these tags. The documentation is really good. They have great examples on how you can do many different things like spacing, layout, flexbox, typography, all that stuff. But for now, I'm just going to apply what I already know to this. So I've got my H1 here. I want to actually wrap the entire thing in a container, so I'm going to do that here as well. I'm going to make a div that this whole thing goes into, and to make it pop from the background, I'm going to give it a different style. So I'm going to give it maybe a BG color, BG gray 700. I don't know if that's too dark. Maybe, yeah, maybe that's fine. Maybe 800. More contrast. Okay, and then this, I'm going to make it text white so it stands out, and the font, I want to make it also bold. Okay, they're actually bold. I don't think bold looks good with big font. I'm going to make it light instead. There we go. Okay, so this div now is a little bit too wide, so I want to give it a maximum size. But first, I'm going to make another container on top of that, so I can center it in the middle of the page. Hold on. I want a maximum width of medium. So you can have different screen sizes here, small, medium, extra large, whatever. Maximum size of medium. Okay, so now that's better size. Yeah, looks about right. But I also want it centered, so I'm gonna have to do margin X auto. Yeah, that works. Actually, no, I want it centered in the screen, so I'll just do fully margin auto. That should center the Y position as well. But it doesn't do that because I suspect my div element isn't full height. So actually, I might need to make this entire thing a div and make it full height. Height full. Does it do it? Okay, maybe not. Oh. Actually, I think it might be height screen. Oh, and it has to be flex. Okay, there we go. So what I had to do there was make this container, this sort of outer container, full screen height, and then a flex box, so that when I margin center it auto, it sets in the middle of this entire box, which is what I want, because I want it to be like sort of in the middle of my app, so it looks nice. Okay, I'm happy with that. Next thing is I probably want a padding here as well, so I'm gonna do a pad 4, so that just gives it a bit of padding. Wait, it's not pad 4, it's P4. There we go. And the reason I do that is that so when you're on mobile, we actually get a little bit of padding from the sides. Maybe 4 is a bit too much, maybe 2 is fine. Yeah, there we go. So it's not up against the edges, right? Now that we have this darker background, I'm actually going to change the outer background as well, because I don't like this light gray. So I'll make this 900, maybe even darker. You might not be able to see the difference. You know what? Maybe I just make it black. Okay, let's make it like actually stand out a little bit more. Okay, so this is kind of ugly because it's just against the sides, so let's also put a padding in here as well. Let's do a padding of 4. See how that looks? Okay, I think that's okay. Maybe a bit more. I do like a bit of, like, you know, negative space, extra space there. Makes it look nicer. Okay, here we go. And now I want rounded corners for these, so we have a nice tool here. We can just do rounded, and we can choose the size of the rounding. I can do rounded medium. I think that looks better. Okay, and actually let's make all the text inside this white by default, otherwise we can't see anything. So I think this will apply to all the children here. Okay, cool. So now I've got my header element. I now need to add this part, this AI branding assistant, this logo, and then, you know, make the spacing a little bit better. So let's copy that. Okay, so firstly for the logo, I have this CopyKit logo SVG prepared here. I don't know if I can preview it, but hold on. Yeah, I need to download extension so that I can actually preview this. Otherwise it just shows up as a bunch of vector. But I can put it in here and you can see it then. So to display this, I need to, well, first I need to import it. And then I need to use the NextJS image module to display it. So let's go ahead and do that now. I forgot how to do this. Hold on. Okay, we import image from next/image. Again, if you're lost about this, then check out the official documentation because they have a lot of information there. And then I'm going to import logo from oops. I call it copy. So I should be able to render this now. Let's try it out. So I've got my H1 header here and I want to put it just above that. So I'll do an image. This is the next image. And the source is going to be the logo. Oops, logo. Okay, great. So that's my logo. I created earlier just using vector tools. But I need it to be smaller. So let's make the size. Hold on, do I have to do the size separately? Oh, there's width and height. So let's try that. Width 32. Okay, maybe that's a bit too small. Let's try something like 42. Pretty good. Alright, so let's center all of this stuff. I think by default we can do it with text center, so maybe I'll give that a try. Just make this a little bit smaller so I have more space. Put this in yet another div because I don't want this to apply to everything underneath it. And center this text style here. Okay, so now this is centered. I want a bit more space though above and under this little section, and I also need my AI branding assistant tagline there. So go ahead and do that now. Okay, we have that. And to our div containing this whole thing, I'm going to add a margin bottom of 6 to give it more space from the interactive element. In fact, you know what? I'm going to actually make this top and bottom margin just to give it more negative space. Okay. A cool trick I kind of like to do with these things to really make them pop is add a bit of a gradient to them. I searched on Stack Overflow and I found a snippet that lets you do that pretty easily. I'm just going to copy paste that here, and I can try to explain what it does. But I have this snippet I've created for it, which is called text gradient style. It makes the text white and transparent, but it clips the text and it creates a background from 2 colors. So these are all Tailwind initiatives as well, directives, and this basically creates a background that the text kind of clips out, and we can make the gradient on the background because we can't gradient the text directly. So let's see if it works. I'm just going to add this to the class name. This. So I'm just going to put this ahead here. Whoops. Text gradient style. I'm going to delete text white because that's going to be overwritten. And then put a space. Don't forget the space here, otherwise it's going to clamp up the style. Okay, so now I have this. But the gradient's not quite the same, like, you know, the colors are spread out. It's because the background extends between this entire div. So it's not just starting from here and ending here. It's starting from here and ending here. So I think we can fix that by fixing the width of this div. I think we can do that by typing width fit. Okay, so that puts it here, but now the colors are correct, but now it's pushed all the way here. And I don't know if we can actually fix this with a margin. Okay, yeah, we can. So we make it margin auto, it puts it back in the middle, but then we fit the width just to that. So I guess we can do the same thing for this one at the bottom here. Actually, I'm wondering if I should just add this to this gradient style so we don't have to keep repeating it. Okay. Now let me try that with this guy. Okay, that looks pretty good. We're on our way. Okay, so now I need to style this section here, this input, and the submit button. So let's go ahead and go to our form page. Just gonna close some of this stuff off. Kind of in the way. Okay. So first I'm just going to wrap stuff in div. I mean, I don't think you have to. You can probably just style some of these elements directly, but I like to do that because it just helps me organize things a little bit better. So I'm going to add some margin to this first so that they're not all clumped together. So margin bottom, pretty easily, get a space there. And then this text is already quite nice. It's a white color, but actually I think to make it look nicer, we're going to just keep it as a gray. There's also different shades of gray as well that we can use. Let's see if this one, I don't know if we want a really like neutral gray. There's also slate gray, which is a little bit cooler. In fact, I might change this background to a slate color as well. See if it works better. Yeah, I think that looks nicer. It's I don't know if you can tell from the video compression, but it's just like slightly more bluish. What if it's 900? Does that work better? Yeah, I like it like 800. Okay. So I've got this line. Now I want the input box to be styled nicely. First of all, I don't like how the text is just like cramped up like that. So let's add some padding. Padding is just with the P. I think 2 is fine. Okay, that's a lot better. And I want to extend all the way to this length. So I'm going to do width full. Okay, that's good. And then I'm also going to want the corners to be rounded because we rounded them here. Okay, I think that looks a lot better. I want to get rid of this ugly orange highlighting. So in fact, I'm going to overwrite this highlighting. I think this browser does it for me automatically, and I want it to be a bluish color instead. So I think I can do that by when it's focused, which means when it's like clicked, I want the outline to be maybe blue, or actually maybe like teal. Okay. That doesn't work. Oh, now it does. Okay. Actually, I don't even know if I need this or if it was just slow to refresh, because I think this should just work. Maybe not. Okay. So I guess I need both. Focus creates a teal outline. Yep. Okay, so the text in here is white because I set the text white, but not the placeholder. So I have to change the text in here. Make this black again. Okay, there we go. So now we've got our input. Actually, why not make it classier and just go for a very dark slate? Make it a bit softer. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with this input. Now let's move this little character limit all the way to the right. I think that this div is full length, so we should be able to just do text right, which we have a character limit here. But in this original prototype, we also have this warning, and it turns red. So we might actually need to do more with the styling. So instead of just moving it, let's make this div a flex box. I'm gonna show you why in a sec. So if I make it flex, we make it flex, I can now add another element to it. And it should be on the same line. But let me wrap this up first. But more importantly, I can actually set how these things are, what layout they have inside this container. So I can do justify between, and it's gonna spread these things out all the way at the ends. I also want a bit of a margin from the top. Actually, I want a margin on both directions, so let's do a little bit of margin, say 2. Okay, so I think that's pretty good. And then the text color, I don't want it too bright because I don't want it to stand out. It's not that important detail. Text slate 700, no, too dark, maybe 300. Go a bit darker, maybe 500. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. It's quite faded, but you can still read it. So now it goes all the way up to 32, and I want it to turn like reddish color, and I want this to show up. So I have those already. Is prompt valid? If the prompt is valid, I want the color to change, and I also want this thing to show up. All right, so let's do this. Let's put this into a variable. Status color equals whatever we had here. Slate. This is nice. And then let's wrap this up in here instead. Do like that. Okay, and now I don't need this anymore. Okay, so I've still got the status color. But if the prompt isn't valid, I'm gonna make the status color a red color. So I can do text red 300 like this. All right, so now it's turned red. Actually, can I get a better looking red? This looks a bit faded. All right, this is fine, I guess. But I also want this status text to appear, so I'm gonna start it off empty at first. And if it's full like this, I'm gonna make it say that. So, but actually we don't want it to sort of hard code this value in, so I'm gonna make that also have this character limit as a variable. There you go. Okay, so now I've got my status text. Let's actually put it here. Okay, the text is a little bit too big though, so we're going to add one more modifier to it, make the text small size. Okay, pretty happy with that. Next, we've got our button. So, again, first of all, I want to use this gradient color I have for the button. So I'm going to copy that style over. This is this one here. Okay, so we've got our color, and this is disabled. Oh, but when it's disabled, I want it to sort of look disabled. It just looks fine right now. So I'm going to do this another modifier they have disabled, and then I'm going to set opacity maybe to 50%. Okay, so now it looks like not clickable. But let's make this look a little bit better. So what are some of the things we can do? First of all, let's break this up so it can be readable. We need to make this full width. I think it looks better if it's the full width of the box. So let's start with that. Okay, better. But we also want it to be like taller. It looks a bit cramped. So let's add a padding of maybe 4 is too much. Yeah, it's definitely too much. Maybe 2. Okay, that looks pretty good. And then we have to add rounded corners as well. It's actually very weird to have certain things have different types of corners. So if you round them, if you round one, I guess you got to round them all. All right, that looks better. See our prototype. I think I actually use a bigger font size for this one. So I do a text large. Whoops. Text large there. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. I probably want a bit of margin from whatever is above it. In fact, instead of changing that, I'm gonna do it here. I'm gonna add a margin bottom, maybe 6. Okay, so now the spacing looks a little bit more sensible. Yep, and it lets me submit it. And the box now turns red, and this is disabled. Okay, so we've done that part of the styling. Cool. So now let's get to the results page, which I'm sure still looks like trash. Just click the submit here. At least we got our box. All right, so what can we do for this one? First of all, we've got this back button. I don't want to redo any of this work, so let's just copy and paste that in first. I know it's not great to reuse code, but for now we just want to get this done. Okay, so immediately the back button looks good. Next, let's get these different things into nice separate sections. I'm probably going to be reusing a bit of code here as well. So you know what, instead, how about I create a class for this and call it result section, like that. I don't even need to make a class. I'll just make it a function for now, because I'm just going to use it here and nowhere else. And I'll have the label, it's going to be a string. Yeah, I'll create it in here even. I'm going to have the label, I'm going to have the body, it's going to be an element, and yeah, that's it. So let's try to render that. So for this one, I'm going to copy this entire thing. think I'd do it there. Functions are not valid React child. Oh, whoops, I have to actually call it. So I will call it with prompt and with the prompt. This is, okay. I don't know if this works. Oh, because this have to be a props. Okay, so now I'm back to where I started with this, but now I can actually style it and then hopefully reuse this function to generate these other parts as well. So first of all, I don't need this bold label anymore because I could just do this with Tailwind. So this becomes normal, but first of all, let's get the container around this. So we want a slightly different BG color, like that. So it's a little bit lighter, but not enough that we have to change our text color completely. Let's add a bit of padding because we know that makes things look nice. And then let's add a little bit of margin as well. Okay, so there's a bit of margin now. More margin? Okay. For this one, let's make this bold. Oh, and actually, let's fade the color a little bit as well. So we won't have it completely white. We'll maybe do slate 300 and font bold. Maybe it can be a bit darker. I don't want it to take away attention from the actual responses too much. Also, I think it creates a nice sort of like contrast. Okay, maybe that looks good. And let's not forget what we did with our rounded medium corners. Now this part though, I actually want it to be a bit bigger. Like I did the same here because, well, actually we have to pull this up for comparison. I made this actually a bit bigger because it's such a small word, a small prompt that, you know, I wanted to sort of fill up the space a little bit, and I feel like it's quite an important part of this section. But if I style it in here, it's gonna affect everything else. So I made it so that I want to be able to just pass in a JSX element in here instead of just the text, so that, which is why I put any here instead of string. So now that I've done that, well, hold on. Let's just see if I can do this instead. Do text to XL. Whoops, I forgot to close the tag. Go. Okay, so I think that's fine. Maybe 2XL is a bit too big, so maybe just XL. Okay. The prompt header, oh, so this, whatever, this generic header probably also needs a bit of a margin. Margin bottom 2. I don't know if that's a bit much. Maybe just 1 is enough. Okay. Yeah, actually, I don't know if I want this to be bold yet. I make it bold in this one. Oh, I did. Okay. Fine, it could be that. Maybe smaller size. Okay, I think this looks pretty good. Make this large. I think XL is a bit too much. Okay, so let's apply this to the snippet as well. So instead of making this whole thing here, I'm gonna copy this. And place this here like this, and then be like branding snippet. But this one can just be, doesn't have to be a div, this one can just be the actual text. I think that would be fine. Okay. I'm okay with this. Yeah, maybe this is a bit lighter, too dark. And now the keywords. Get margin. I'm not happy with this margin actually. Let's give it a bigger margin. 4. Is 4 too big? It's not too bad. Okay, so the keywords itself, I need to actually create a separate element for each of these ones. And arrange them, I guess, kind of like with a gap between. So kind of like this with the hashtag. So let's see how we can do that. Again, first let's start by wrapping this up. I mean, we already have all this stuff going for us here. So we'll just copy paste this. Then we'll have the keywords element. Actually, I can just pass this wholesale. Now I can get rid of this. Nope, there's actually a div holding all of them. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's give our button a bit of space. Give it a little bit. You know what? In fact, each of these things probably could use a little bit more space, I think. Okay, there we go. Looks better to me. More space. All right. Now let's turn these keywords into actual tags. So we already have a little thing here that turns each one into a list of elements and a div. But these divs don't have a style, and the container themselves don't have a style. So this is just the keyword element here. Let's do that out here so it's just easier to read. Keyword elements holder guess. This is going to be the div that holds the keyword elements. So I'll put it like that. And then the keyword elements holder is what we put. Okay, so now we've got an extra div on it. Well, this actually has to be. Okay, there we go. So I want this to be a flex box, because I don't want them to be on a new line. But now we have this ugly thing where it just sort of goes like that. So I am going to make it flex wrapped. So now it stays inside the bounds. Okay, we're getting there. And then I'm going to add a gap between them. So let's add a gap of 2. Okay, that looks a lot better. And now I actually want this to look like tags. So let's style each element individually as well. Class name, BG teal. Let's pick a very light teal color, I guess. How do we do this? Do we want a dark tag or a light tag? How do we do that? Maybe light looks better. I'm not sure. Like this. Okay, I think this is pretty good. We'll add a small padding. 2. Oh no, that's way too big. Maybe just 1. Okay, but I don't like how it's close to the... Actually, first, let's just, before I go crazy, let's make the text more legible. So I'm gonna make the text a dark teal. Okay, so now I have that. Now I want the padding on the x-axis to be a little bit bigger, so I can just add that separately. Let's make that 2. Okay, I'm okay with that. I don't know if we need the text to be that big though. They're just tags, so let's make the text small. All right, and now we have to add the rounding. The rule still applies. If we round 1, we have to round them, pretty much all of them. There. Okay, so that's pretty much our styling for this app. I think it looks pretty well. I mean, we ended up doing a dark style instead of light style, but I think you get the idea. It's more or less the same at the end of the day. I mean, if you wanted to turn this into a light style, you can. But that's pretty much it. Let's just do a quick sanity check again of our app, make sure everything still works. I want to try a different product this time. What about pizza? Okay, run this, and yep, there you go. Best pizza in the world, blah, blah, blah. Come and try the most delicious pizza in town. All right, I'm pretty happy with this. Now, I want this to be live on Vercel, so we, as I mentioned before, to deploy this, because As you notice, this is still running on our local host. So to deploy this, all we have to do is just commit and push the site. So let's give that a shot now. So I'm just going to do git add all, and then git commit message, add TailwindCSS styling. And now I can push. Okay, push complete. So let's actually go back to our Vercel deployment and see if something's happening. So we can see here it's building, and we can see our latest commit message. And this is pretty much instantaneous, which is wonderful. And we go in here, we can actually see the work log as it's building, fetching this changes, and then building it all in. And after a while, the build is complete, and you can see the preview's been updated to match our new style. And if we click visit, we'll see the new site, and our deployment URL is there. If you want to share this, you can just also share the domain itself, the vercel.app domain. In fact, I click that now. I'll see it come up, and let's test our site. So we have this here, and I'll just put soccer as my prompt again, submit, and see that all the new styling we add is now live, and the app is also working end to end. So that's pretty much it. That's the tutorial. Thanks for sticking throughout this project. I know it was very big. If you want to follow along or get lost or anything, then I recommend you checking out the GitHub, because I've made a new commit for each section of this tutorial. Or feel free to just post me a comment or questions if you run into specific problems. And once we've styled up the Tailwind CSS, I think we've pretty much achieved everything we set out to in this plan here. So we've got a fully functional web app that a user can access, and now we can focus on developing the product further or adding new features. And with that, we finally wrap up our SaaS tutorial. If you've made it this far and your project is functional, then congratulations. This was a massive project. If you got stuck along the way or you need extra help, then feel free to drop a comment below, or drop a comment on the GitHub repository as well. Finally, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and found it useful. If you have any other projects or ideas you'd like to see be made into a tutorial just like this one, then please let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching.